Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Law Society's Technology Conference, a two-day event focusing on the world of law and technology. And we're really pleased to be able to welcome you to this online conference. My name is Peter Wright. I'm the Managing Director of Digital Law, and I am a solicitor. And I'm also chair of the Law Society's Policy and Regulatory Affairs Committee at Chancery Lane in London, though of course Chancery Lane is currently closed. In years gone by, we've done these sorts of conferences in that beautiful big hall in the centre of London, but we could only have got about 200 people in there at one time. Yet today, I'm very pleased to say that we're welcoming over 550 delegates who've registered with us from all over the world to join us for our two-day discussion on law and technology. We have a really packed agenda for you over the next 2 days. We are going to be introducing the speaker from the National Cybersecurity Centre, Karen, very shortly, and she's going to be taking us through issues with regards to the legal sector in particular, the risks, threats, and the issues, of course, to deal with this year. There'll then be a very short 5-minute break at 10:30 before we then go through to our first panel session of the day, which is building business resilience. And we've got speakers from firms and Alistair May from Benyon, Joan Burgess, Andrew McClure to look at regulatory issues and how you can demonstrate compliance. Another 5 break as well. Still our third and final session today. That is making the most of existing technology. That is going to now be a list of speakers, including Christine Dumont from She Breaks the Law and Senior Manager of Innovation and Engagement at White Case. We've got Helen Lowe from Phishing Attack. That will then take us through to 1:05, then be finishing at about 1:50. That is the full lineup for day one of our technology law conference. It's a fascinating time for us to be looking at law and technology. Let's face it, we are in a world where we've come out from the difficulties that the global pandemic has made everyone face this year. And who knows, as we now come into September, there seems to be rising cases around the world. We have to ensure that our businesses carry on advising our clients in a rapidly changing world of different restrictions that will be coming in, and who knows what we'll have to end up dealing with. So there are going to be loads of challenges that we'll have to face, and we can do it in a digital way. It's interesting when I think that at the Law Society we did a series of roundtable presentations last year to practitioners up and down the country, having conversations around technology and the use of law tech. And it was an interesting challenge going to different parts of the country, from Wales to the south coast of England, as well as the great cities, Leeds, Birmingham, etc. Yet, it was interesting that lawyers were very open to the use of technology and open to utilising it to help their firm run more efficiently and to deliver services in a different, innovative way to, most importantly, our clients, the end user. And having been open to that option, I think this year the professionals responded to that challenge. And the only way that any businesses have been able to carry on is through using technology as a result. So we can hopefully learn from some of those experiences and also share some of these with results. We've got some fantastic resources on the Law Society website with regards to technology, with regards to law tech, and with regard to things like cybersecurity and data protection. So we have made sure that our website, our new website, our new Law Society website, lots of content with regards to security and case protection and Vortex. It has things like practice notes, which help with everything from compliance to guarding against fraud and online fraud, and it even has data content specifically for 2020. So I can certainly direct you to that, as well as the other webinars and podcasts we are regularly producing to provide you with up-to-date content on the challenges that are out there. So that's just welcome to our conference today. I really hope that you're going to enjoy it. We've got some really good panels lined up for you, but I'm now very pleased to be able to welcome Karen from the National Cybersecurity Centre. Now, the National Cybersecurity Centre has been doing some fantastic work alongside the legal profession, looking at some of the threats that we face in terms of fraud and in terms of the evolving threats that are out there. There are some brilliant things, in particular on the NCSC website, that I'm privileged enough to be able to see in the past. I've been along to some briefings specifically related to the legal profession. It's really hard to handle on this threats, be able to disseminate their insights to us. Very, very pleased to welcome Karen today on being able to talk to us. So I'm now going to introduce Karen, who's the engagement lead for legal and accountancy sectors at the Cyber. Welcome, Karen, to our Water Science Technology and Water.
Hello everybody, I hope you can all hear me. My name's Karen and I work at the NCSC in the Economy and Society Engagement team. Our role is to reach a range of UK previously underrepresented UK businesses, large and small, charities, universities and schools, to improve their levels of cybersecurity resilience and develop their maturity and thus raise the UK cybersecurity as a whole. Today, I will cover how things have changed as a result of coronavirus, an update on the cyber threat to the legal sector, and run through very briefly the sorts of things that you can be doing to help practice and prepare yourself for a cyber attack. So a little bit firstly about the NCSC. So the NCSC is the UK's authority on cybersecurity and a part of GCHQ. Our mission is to make the UK the safest place to live and do business online. No small challenge. The NCSC is committed to serving all of UK PLC, not just traditional government critical national infrastructure, but also non-CNI, charities, academia and the public. So according to the Dcms Cybersecurity Breaches Survey 2020, 46% of all UK businesses identified at least one breach or attack in the last year. This figure was 32% last year. Cyber attacks are getting much more sophisticated and in some situations harder to spot. At the top here, we've got a breakdown of what makes up that figure. You'll notice that the numbers are significantly higher in some organisations. However, the number of charities that identified a cyber breach are less and bring that overall figure down. Not only is there a financial loss to these organisations, but there's a huge loss of productivity hours. From the bottom chart, we continue to see that fraudulent emails, by either directing us to fraudulent websites or other spoofing organisations in emails or online, continue to be the most common type of cyber attack. I think before we go on to look at the specific types of threats we are seeing in the legal sector, it's important to note that coronavirus has had and is having a big impact on lives in every aspect. More people were, and still are in lots of cases, and in the future probably, working from home. Organisations had to set up processes and systems quickly to enable businesses to continue to operate without the normal testing and security procedures implemented. We had to do our jobs while being distracted, trying to homeschool our children, for example. I still have the war wounds. The mix between home and office working all started to blur, and cybercriminals saw this as a huge opportunity with a spike in email scams linked to coronavirus, the worst we have seen in years. Cybercriminals are targeting individuals as well as industries, including aerospace, transport, manufacturing, hospitality, healthcare and insurance. Phishing emails written in English, French, Italian, Japanese and Turkish languages have been found. I'll whiz through these quickly, but it's always good to see real examples of the scams that are out there. On picture 1, people who click on the attached document are taken to a spoof web page designed to harvest login details. Picture 2, if a member of the public clicked on Access Your Funds Now, it would take them to a fake government web page, encouraging them to input all their financial and tax information. Picture 3, hackers pretending to represent the World Health Organization claim that an attached document details how recipients can prevent the disease's spread. This little measure can save you, they claim, but Proofpoint says the attached doesn't contain any useful advice and instead infects computers with malicious software called Agent Tesla Keylogger. This records every keystroke and sends it to the attackers, a tactic that allows them to monitor their victims' every move online. The last one I'm going to show you is this example that was reported to malware experts Kaspersky. The fake CDC email asks for donations to develop a vaccine and requests payments be made in the cryptocurrency Bitcoin. The premise is of course ridiculous, but the email address and signature look convincing. As part of managing the coronavirus situation, many organisations will have more of their staff working from home. This presents new cybersecurity challenges that must be managed. This guidance recommends steps to take if your organisation is introducing or scaling up the amount of home working. While working from home will not be new to many organisations and employees, the coronavirus is forcing organisations to consider home working on a greater scale and for a longer period of time. You may have more people working from home than usual, and some of these may have not done it before. This guidance helps talk you through the use of virtual private networks, VPNs. If you're already using a VPN, make sure it is fully patched. Additional licenses, capacity or bandwidth may be required if your organisation normally has a limited number of remote users. USB drives can contain lots of sensitive information, are easily misplaced, and when inserted into your IT systems can introduce malware. When USB drives and cards are openly shared, it becomes hard to track what they contain, where they've been, and who has used them. If you need to set up new accounts or accesses so your staff can work from home, you should set strong passwords for user accounts. The NCSC recommends using 3 random words such as elephant, helicopter, orange. The NCSC also strongly recommends you implement 2-factor authentication if possible. Remote users may need to use different software or use familiar applications in a different way compared to what they do when in the office. Staff are more likely to have their devices stolen or lose them when they are away from the office or home. Make sure devices encrypt data while at rest, which will protect data on the device if it is lost or stolen. Most modern devices have encryption built in, but encryption may still need to be turned on and configured. Make sure staff know how to report any problems. This is especially important for security issues. Your staff might feel more exposed to cyber threats when working outside the office environment, so now is a great time for them to work through the NCSC's Top Tips for Staff e-learning package. So let's get back to the legal sector. In 2018, we produced this report and found that the most significant cyber threats that law firms should be aware of are phishing, data breaches, ransomware, supply chain compromise. We're hoping to update this report early next year, but the threats included in this report are all still valid. The latest trends that we are seeing also include cloud services and vulnerability scanning. The way we are working has changed. We're doing more and more online, and that needs us to rethink the way that we are storing and transmitting our data. Cloud services, and Office 365 in particular, are an increasingly common target for a range of threat actors. In some cases, these services are only protected by a username and password. There has been significant use of tools and scripts to try and guess user passwords. In December last year, we published an advisory detailing how to protect Office 365 accounts against the kind of credential stealing attacks that we had been seeing. We believe that anyone with an Office 365 account would benefit from acting on the security recommendations in this advisory. From small businesses through to large enterprises, implementing measures such as multi-factor authentication should be a high priority. The NCSC has also produced some guidance on how to configure, deploy and use cloud services securely. You can find this on our website for free. Ransomware is a type of malware that prevents you from accessing your computer or the data that is stored on it. The computer itself may become locked, or the data on it might be stolen, deleted, or encrypted. Some ransomware will also try to spread to other machines on the network, such as the WannaCry malware that impacted the NHS in May 2017. We're seeing a growth across all sectors of ransomware attacks, especially against education establishments in August ahead of the start of the new term, which caused varying levels of disruption depending on the level of security establishments had in place. The NCSC issued an alert to the sector containing a number of steps that they can take to keep cybercriminals out of their networks following a recent spike in ransomware attacks. However, even if you pay the ransom, there is no guarantee that you will get access to your computer or your files. Occasionally, malware is presented as ransomware, but after the ransom is paid, the files are not decrypted. For these reasons, it's essential that you always have a recent offline backup of your most important files and data. The line between ransomware attacks and data breaches continued to blur in early 2020, with a number of prolific ransomware operators creating their own websites where they publish the stolen data of non-paying victims. Phishing continues to be the most prevalent attack seen in the last few years. They're becoming much more sophisticated now, and not just coming through by email, but by text, phone call, and social media. How many of you have been phoned by Microsoft telling you that you have a virus and to give them remote access to your laptop? Vulnerability scanning is looking for vulnerabilities in software, like a backdoor in. Vendors find a weakness in the software and patch it. However, cybercriminals try to take advantage of this before people update their devices. Where possible, update your software as soon as you see that there is an update available. We know that the financial institutions that you deal with are enforcing stricter audit requests on law firms. What they're trying to do is understand who their customers are and who you deal with. How safe is their data as it flows through the supply chain? What systems and security measures do you have in place to store their information? So what can we do to protect ourselves? We've talked about passwords already. Use 3 random words, for example, toffee, aeroplane, bottle, and 2-factor authentication wherever possible. Software updates. Make sure you update your software as soon as possible. Staff training. Use the time to do some staff training. Top tips for staff package on our website takes about 30 minutes to do. And practice. I'll talk you through a product called Exercise in a Box shortly that can help you with this. Have a look at the NCSC website. It's full of practical advice and guidance. There's advice on mitigations for current threats. There's a weekly threat report summary. There are links to key products and services and an inquiries area where you can get in touch with a question. I'd start with our small business guide. It focuses on 5 key areas where small businesses can improve their resilience. We've got information about Cyber Essentials, a cyber hygiene scheme that addresses 5 key controls that, when implemented correctly, can prevent approximately 80% of the most common cyber attacks, and shows your clients that you take cybersecurity and protection of their information seriously. Moving on from the small business guide, we've got 10 steps to cybersecurity, many principles similar to those outlined in the small business guide, but aimed at larger companies, and it's now used by a majority of the FTSE 350. We've got CISP, which is a safe environment that provides an opportunity for a community of people to engage, share and collaborate on cybersecurity. We have a legal sector group set up on there. There's the NCSC Board Toolkit, designed to help board members get to grips with cybersecurity. And we've got Exercise in a Box, which is an online tool produced by the NCSC, which helps organisations test and practice their response to a cyber attack. It's completely free and you don't have to be an expert to use it. I'll show you a few screenshots of that tool next. So like I say, Exercise in a Box aims to exercise and improve the resilience and preparedness of our nation's organisations in effectively responding to cyber incidents in a safe and private environment. There are different types of exercises. Most are tabletop exercises that run through a scenario to get you to have conversations with the right people in your organisation to understand what your role is, what your processes are, and to test those processes. There are a couple of micro exercises which are much shorter bite-sized exercises. And there's also a physical exercise where a harmless token is deployed onto your network and your team must follow the prompts to find it. Here is a list of the current themes and scenarios that are covered in Exercise in a Box. We have linked scenarios to NCSC products and guidance, and as this is a live tool, will be continually updated. It means you always have the latest advice and support. The attack scenarios we have provided for you are also the most common attacks mentioned in our user research. So to log into Exercise in a Box, you do that through our website, and you get to choose an exercise from the scenarios I've just shown you. In this example here, we're going to have a look through a phishing attack. Note the useful resources down the right-hand side, from getting started with Exercise in a Box to Cyber Essentials and our 10 Steps product. In this scenario, we've picked an exercise and have gathered the resources required, again helpfully linked from the exercise. And so the exercise begins. An email is received with some indicators that it should be treated as suspicious. The sender's email address contains the number 1 instead of the letter L. Several of the words are misspelt. There's no email signature. The email conveys a sense of urgency. This is the attempt to avoid the recipient putting any significant thought into their response. The attachment has 2 extensions, one of which is an executable .exe, which means it will run as an application. The attachment would be blocked by most email servers, but serves as an obvious example in this case. To the right are the discussion points that the facilitator will be drilling into using the very comprehensive facilitator prompts, which provide questions to ensure the discussion remain focused and answer the observation questions. So here the discussion point is, what mechanisms does your organisation have in place to make it difficult for attackers to reach their users? Are there any email firewalls, spam blockers, filters, or automated phishing detection systems in place? How would those mechanisms work on the example phishing email presented in the scenario? Have these systems ever been verified? Note that they may not function as participants expect. The exercise continues, given the facilitator prompts as you move through the discussion points. At the end of every inject or event, once consensus has been gained, the results of the discussion are recorded and are marked between not at all confident and completely confident. This feeds into a report that you get at the end of the exercise. After this, the facilitator will move on to Inject 2, which is where the exercise continues as the user who received the phishing email has opened it up and malware has deployed. Another set of discussion points are then set against the inject. And it's the same format for Inject 3. What permissions do your users have? Do users have administrator permissions? Can users access other users' files or data? What systems do users have access to? What sensitive data could the user access? What would be the impact? And again for Inject 4, you can now see we're moving through the incident, starting with the individual, moving through mitigations, and may have in place, and now we're looking at how the organisation's business can survive this attack. We've now at this point where we've got to Inject 5, where the press are now interested in events around the organisation, and again discussion points lead to a final set of questions and observations. How do you respond to the journalists? Do you issue a statement or grant an interview? What do you tell your staff, supply chain and customers? At the end of the inject phase, the organisation now has the opportunity to think about what they've learnt, how understanding of the threat has changed, and what changes will be made. This has been pre-populated and is pulled into a final report. This is the personalised report, a succinct and clearly readable report to work against, complete with NCSC guidance relevant to the exercise. This prints as 2 sides of A4, but presented differently here for the slide. The last thing I wanted to mention today is that at the NCSC we often get asked about cyber insurance and how it fits within an organisation's overall approach to cyber risk. While we can't tell you what your exact insurance needs are, we have looked at useful cybersecurity considerations and come up with some questions that can help you work out what, if anything, is right for your organisation. Along with everything I've spoken about today, you can find the questions on our website. Some of these questions may help you think about what cybersecurity defences you already have in place and what do you want to protect the most. Most importantly, buying cyber insurance doesn't mean you no longer have to worry about cyber attacks. That's it for me, so thank you very much for listening and I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you very much, Karen, for that presentation. I don't believe we've had any questions. I've not had any come through to me, so thank you very much indeed for the presentation there, highlighting a lot of the risks that we need to be aware of and sharing your insights with us. And I can certainly direct everyone to the great advice that is on the NCSC website. Hopefully everyone can hear me okay. I know we're having a few issues with the audio. We are now going to be going into panel 1, which starts at 10:30. So there'll be a break for just a few minutes until 10:30 and our next panel. Thank you all very much indeed. Welcome back, everyone, to now the first panel discussion of the day, and this is building business resilience. So looking at things like remote comms, cybersecurity, the cloud, e-signatures, going paperless, to give you an idea of all the things that we will be talking about over the course of the next hour or so. I'm very pleased to be able to welcome a panel of specialists from all across the country, and I say all across the country in a very genuine way, given that one of our speakers is all the way up in Berwick-on-Tweed, so just about as far from as far to the north as it's possible to be. So very pleased to be able to welcome Mark as well as the other speakers. So I'm just going to go to each speaker to allow them to introduce themselves. First of all, Mark Pentecost.
Good morning, everyone. Yes, my name is Mark Pentecost. I'm one of the directors at a very small high street firm, general practitioners in Berwick-upon-Tweed, and I think that's probably all I need to say at the moment. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mark, and thank you for joining us. Next up, we've got Alistair.
Thank you, Peter. So my name is Alistair Maiden. I'm the CEO and founder of Psych, which is a legal technology consultancy. We typically act for large corporate organisations, helping them to buy and implement legal technology. Most of us are lawyers or former lawyers, so will have worked either in practice or in-house. And we've got about 70 colleagues working across the globe. We've never had an office, so hopefully we can offer a different perspective.
Indeed, distributed working seems to be the way forward for a lot of organisations. Thanks very much, Alistair. Heather.
Hi, Heather Ensign, a US qualified lawyer, but I am currently a lead consultant with the Digital Law UK and also managing director events and Evaluate. I work a lot in the fields of legal technology and law tech, as well as providing a lot of training and consultancy to law firms and other companies on how to comply with things like GDPR and how to be nimble and work through things like what we're going through.
Indeed. So, of course, I expect you've been incredibly busy with that over the course of the last year, Heather. Thank you very much. Emma.
Hi, I'm Emma Philpott. I'm CEO of IASME. So IASME are the Cyber Essentials partner for the government. So we run the Cyber Essentials scheme. Cyber Essentials is a certification that shows you're doing the most basic cyber security controls. So that's us.
Brilliant. Thank you, Emma. And finally, David.
Hi, yeah, I'm the Chief Technology Officer of Mitigo Cybersecurity. We specialise in law firms, and particularly small and medium-sized law firms looking after their cyber security. As you can imagine, through this period, we've had a lot of demand to make sure as people get more distributed and more remote, that they get themselves secure.
Excellent. Thank you, David. And thank you to our panel for being able to join us today. So the first question I wanted to ask all of you is really how you've sort of responded to the challenge of this year. So how have your respective organisations been able to adapt to the lockdown? Mark, do you want to kick us off?
Yes, thank you, Peter. Well, one of the advantages, I suppose, of being a very small firm with only 2 directors is that we were able to make decisions very quickly. As hardly any stakeholders involved, really. And I think the key thing that we did right from the start is we didn't hesitate. We made decisions very quickly. We furloughed staff that we could furlough. Our office manager had childcare issues anyway, so she worked from home. We identified the key fee earners that we wanted to keep in the office. And because of a happy situation here, where we're in a very old Georgian building, over 3 or 4 stories, depending on our usage, we were able to do that safely and keeping staff in isolation from each other. But it was a challenge, and it was something that we had to really discuss and review on a daily basis. We took the decision very early on to close the office to the public, unless there was something that somebody needed to come in to do urgently with regard to ID or signing deeds that needed a wet signature. And one of the main things that came out of this was that working as we were without any support staff, and given that we wanted to reduce physical contact with clients, it meant that we finally embraced working almost paperless, sending out client care letters for electronic signature. We used Leap, and we were aware that Leap had all kinds of functionality that we hadn't been using, but we were meaning to get round to at some point. And it meant that we implemented much earlier with quite a lot of benefit really to the business going forward. So it was unwanted change, but we've taken a lot of positives out of it.
So probably change that happened a lot sooner than it otherwise would have done, perhaps. Absolutely.
Maybe eventually, but you know, it's quite a conservative firm in many ways with a small c, and as a lot of people listening will know, that, you know, as lawyers, we're generally quite reluctant to change, if we can possibly help it. But we found the experience to be very positive, actually, in many ways. It's made us more efficient, and although we had quite a dip in new instructions from March into April, we've hardly seen any change in our turnover. It seems to have evened out, and we're extremely busy at the moment, and we're able to process work a lot more quickly than we used to now that we've got our staff back.
So good signs given the
some good signs. Yeah,
the effect on turnover, I think, for the economy as a whole. That sounds good. David, how was it?
Well, I just wanted to come in on some of Mark's points there, because obviously we're not a law firm, but we look after a lot of law firms, and there are some real positives in terms of we've seen that, you know, managing partners and senior partners have really got engaged with their technology, and I don't want to say for the first time, but have really understood the opportunities that are there for productivity and client experience. So we've seen that's been a good thing. Obviously, they've been asking us how to do that safely. But the other thing is the uptake of remote technology, cloud platforms that weren't being considered before, and mobile apps to facilitate documents, etc. So I just wanted to concur with, we've seen that across the industry is the positivity of using technology.
Brilliant, thank you. Emma?
I wanted to say that, so from the Cyber Essentials situation, so we certify like 1,300 companies a month at the moment to Cyber Essentials. And I think the key point is that people have had to adjust very quickly to the pandemic and remote working. But it's really key that people still focus on those essential controls in cybersecurity. So, you know, it was very difficult to start with. People suddenly had to work from home. And as we heard some cases of employers saying, just use whatever device you've got at home, you know, which was not secure at all. And over time, people hopefully have been putting in those security measures. But we still get companies talking about, oh, we'll do the assessment based on our usual working, meaning everyone's in the office. You know, it's not the usual working anymore. People from companies to accept that this is how it is now, at least for the foreseeable future, and you have to be working in a secure way. So it's great that people have embraced the new technology and the distributed working, but they still have to think about the most essential technical controls.
Thank you, Emma. I particularly love the fact you referred there that, yeah, it's great if you want to use the technology, but using your own personal devices is not necessarily the way to go. The phrase bring your own disaster springs to mind. Heather?
Yeah, I mean, we were fortunate in that we actually do this for a living beforehand. We told law firms how to plan for the future, and if they listened to us, they did. And so we were prepared in the sense that as soon as we saw that this was going to be an issue, we told everyone to stay home and work, and we already had computers for everyone. They just took their computers home, which had the equipment on it. We were already using Clio, which was one of the first case management systems ever that was cloud-based. I was using it in my law firm in the States back in 2006 and 7, I think. So those were the things that we could control and could happen, but sometimes there are things you can't control that we still have people try and anticipate for. Our biggest issue was because the building that we were in had been closed to public services, we couldn't get post. And the post office was just not prepared for how to reroute post to different companies. But the good news was that when we eventually got this massive pile of post in, we had worked in such a way that almost everything was accessible online, to bank statements, to client things like that, so that it wasn't actually that big of a deal when the post. So trying to take as much into your own control as possible, but anticipating. I always say my saying is prepare for the worst, but expect the best. So just because you're planning for a global disaster and being able to work in whatever remote thing doesn't mean you're being negative. It means you're planning appropriately so that when these things do happen, I know for both our companies, it didn't affect us in terms of how we worked because we were ready for this. It just happened and we were like, yep, that's good. But that's not going to be the case for everyone if they I don't, and law firms particularly, as everyone put, if you don't think about the possibilities, you don't think about how things are changing and will change, and particularly those who are saying, oh, we'll all be going back to the office, don't worry about it, we'll just hold out until we go back to the office. Well, what if you don't, or what if this happens again? Make sure you're ready for that.
Indeed, I think that's an excellent point, given some of the headlines, certainly in the UK press today, suggesting that we might be getting that advice to work from home if you all possibly can. It might be the noise coming from government over the next few days, in contrast to what they've been saying for the last few weeks. So those who were wanting to come back to the office may face a problem. Having said that, I've actually spoken to a lot of people at different law firms up and down the country over the last couple of months, and it's interesting how many staff actually continued to work throughout the lockdown. The phrase I heard more than once from a few partners was splendid isolation. I think they actually enjoyed being in offices on their own, but who knows what the motivations were. Alistair, what was it like for you and your organisation and your clients, I suppose? Because it sounds like you were all working in a pretty distributed fashion in the first place, so it might not have been such a challenge to switch to working from home, but what was it like for you and what was it like for your clients?
Well, it was, so I think you're right, from an operational perspective, not much change for us because we were working in that way anyway. However, from a personal perspective, I spent most of my time in a plane or a train or some form of transport, and so and the same for the rest of our leadership team. So actually our utilization and our productivity has gone up significantly because our customers don't expect us to do that anymore. And it's been really notable, actually, the improvement in kind of IT literacy, particularly amongst law firm partners who are probably the worst, but also, even more, I guess, more senior stakeholders generally have really improved. So very happy, very comfortable in this kind of environment. And I think that we're doing this conference in this way today shows how things have come on. I think one of the big issues for us has been, obviously, quite a few of our customers have run out of money. There's been a lot of insecurity in that respect. So the big decision for us early on was, do we go down the route of furloughing a load of people, or do we keep them on and maybe have them working on some structural projects, or maybe just working at a lower profit margin? So we took that latter option. I think it created a difficult period for us from a financial perspective, but it has paid off significantly in the last couple of months, because while some of our competitors are kind of coming out of being mothballed we're ready to go. And in fact, we've done a lot of work that we can reuse, and I think that's been really positive. I just want to make one point actually, which I was, funnily enough, right at the start of this, about 25 of the psych team were on a ski trip in France when France locked down. And so we were in France for 3 days. We only actually had 1 day skiing. It was noted that this was quite a good kind of crisis management exercise. People pay for that kind of experience. So we had 2 days in France in an apartment together to think about it. And one of the key points that I made to the team was, we don't know yet how long this is going to go on for and what the long-term impact is. But what I would suggest is that in terms of whether this makes an impact in the long term will depend on habit. And, this has been going on for 7 months now. So I would suggest that working digitally, working from home has become habit. And I think there'll be a great resistance to going back into an office, certainly from my perspective. So I've gone from 3.5 years of basically seeing my kids a couple of days a week to 7 months of seeing them every day. I'm not going to give that up. Life's too short. And I'm just one person, but I think we'll see, I really do think that we'll see an ongoing change in patterns due to this, the power of habit.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point, Alistair, and I think it's interesting how many people I think have actually been resisting the call to return to the office that the government was sort of the drumbeat over the last few weeks up until the cases started to rise again. And it's been interesting that some people are absolutely thinking yes, we'll continue to work from home. I found that certainly running a law firm, it was an issue that we actually felt it was better just to have 1 or 2 days back in the office each week. Just from a supervision perspective, there were certain conversations and things that you might be having daily video calls, but there were issues that from a supervisory position, people didn't necessarily feel comfortable raising that on a video call. But if you're face-to-face in the office, or, well, face-to-face from about 3 meters social distancing to each other, meant that people would still be able to at least raise that over a coffee or over a quick conversation on another matter in ways that they wouldn't otherwise have done. So I think to a certain extent it could be blended, and hybrid could be a model for some people as well. We've had a couple of really good questions come through, and I'll be coming to those shortly, but I just wanted to make sure that everyone knows that you can submit questions for our panel through the chat facility that you've got there on your YouTube feed. So if you aren't seeing the chat, there is the button you can press below the screen where you can then enter the chat and put in any questions there, and we're keeping an eye on those, and we'll be coming through to some of those shortly. But I just wanted to ask another question of our panel before I do, which is really what do you feel have been the biggest risks from the move to remote working? And I'm going to come to Emma on this one first, because Emma, you highlighted the issue on the bring your own disaster and sort of stampeding to use technology that might not necessarily be the safest and most secure method. But I think that sort of typified the difficulty, particularly at the start of lockdown, where it was just a stampede to work digitally without thinking about perhaps what's the most compliant and safe way to do so. So I'll come to you first on that one, Emma.
Okay. So yes, there are obviously lots of risks. So some of it is because people haven't thought it through. They haven't thought through the risks, and maybe they weren't aware of them. So if you use a device that's in your home that your child also uses, they might have been gaming on that device. They might have been downloading cheats or downloading, illegal music or films, God forbid. Those are very highly linked to malware. So you're very likely to get malware if you start downloading things like that. If you then start linking that, even through VPN, to your business systems, then that can be very, very high risk. So these kind of things people maybe hadn't thought through. I know when I first came to cybersecurity, I suddenly realized that the devices in my home, might not be that secure. And as soon as you link them to your business systems, you're opening that door to the cyber criminal. So there's all those slightly subtle things that you have to think through. certainly from our point of view as an organisation as well, one of the biggest risks was our staff. We had a lot of staff that were quite vulnerable, couldn't drive, weren't able to go on public transport, and maybe didn't have any family at all. And so they were completely by themselves, working by themselves. And so we had to work harder to support them. We brought in lots of, Teams calls and chats and whole staff meetings, but that was something that we wouldn't have had to do before. And of course, that is also a vulnerability. When you get depressed, unhappy staff, particularly staff worried about their jobs and worried about their income, that is also a big risk. One of the biggest ways that companies get breached, the biggest way is by mistake, but the second biggest way is the insider threat. So unhappy staff. And of course, you put them all at home by themselves in worry of their job, and that's a perfect storm. So those are really the main points that I would say.
Indeed, that insider threat's one in terms of, like you say, it could be someone who intentionally starts to do things that aren't in the interest of the business, accessing things they shouldn't, sending it on, or it could just be someone acting unwittingly, copying in the wrong person, sending the wrong information, and it can be a real issue. But thank you very much for that, Emma. And I was going to come to Heather and then David. Heather.
Thank you. And just following on that and what you're talking about, people, we emphasize a lot training and continual training and having an open environment. And one of the difficulties with the work from home, which one of the things we noticed is a massive increase in the phishing emails and text messages ourselves. But we have an environment where we said, if you're not sure, always ask somebody and question it. So always question what's happening. But it's harder when there's a work from home environment, how to do that. Who do you turn to ask? Is this an appropriate email? What should I do with this email? Is this a text appropriate? What should I be doing? And when people are afraid and at home and not unsure, they're much more likely to make those mistakes. So making sure that your employees have somebody that they feel comfortable saying, I don't know if this is a real text or not. It's making it okay to ask and saying, this is your person, this is the person to ask, or if that person's unavailable, this is the person to ask, and that person knows not to do it in judgment, but to thank them every time they do that. Thank you so much for checking. Thank you for taking care of our company. It creates that culture. So not just having that training, it's okay to look for things, but to ask for things, but also knowing who that person is, who their trusted person is to ask.
I think that's a really important point. David?
Yeah, so we've seen two particular issues accelerate significantly while during lockdown and the period following. And the first one is a significant increase in ransomware attacks. And they've got a nasty twist to them now in terms of people will know that ransomware encrypts your files, but the fraudsters are now taking the information out with them first and then encrypting, which gives them two shots at the ransom. The reason that's linked to what's happened is that they're getting in through poorly configured remote connections. So bring your own device has a part to play in that, but as people have rushed to connect computers and laptops from outside to inside the office, they've opened up holes in the firewall deliberately, but haven't had it configured properly. And there are other layers of strength in depth that you have to do around access to files, stronger authentication, which have not been in place. So if nobody listens to anything I say today, the one thing I'd like you to do is have a little look at that, because we see it at the other end where we have to help law firms out where they've had their data encrypted. So really important that as you go to distributed models, you understand how secure your connections are and that they've been properly looked at.
That's a really important point, David, when you look at the chaos that ransomware has caused to organizations large and small, including law firms. And the fact that risk is evolving, as you say, is something I mean we need to all be very conscious of. I'm just going to...
Sorry. Sorry, there's one key point that you said there is small and large. I mean, what the fraudsters are doing is that they're scanning the internet for these new remote connections. So they're not after your firm, they're after a vulnerability. So if they find it, they'll come in and have a look and see what you've got.
Yeah, exactly. It's always that automated scanning. It's not like someone's deliberately thinking, I'm going to target this organization. It's just, it's automated. It's just looking for a vulnerability. And once it finds that, it ends up being exploited. And it's always I think sometimes we tend to think that the threat is, someone sat there with a laptop physically trying to get in, when of course, actually it isn't. The majority of threats are just systems out there looking for vulnerability. Mark, just coming to you, what sort of been the biggest risks for your firm that you've been able to sort of identify and try and cope with when it's come to the remote working?
Yeah, I mean, we try to be as aware as we could possibly be about the risks while thinking, on the fly all the way through a lot of this. One decision we made very early on is that we wouldn't have people working remotely on any client matters. The only person we did have working from home part-time was our office manager. So that was really more of a kind of strategic firm putting in policies, that kind of thing. She didn't have access to client files. I think there was still probably a risk there. We just didn't have the opportunity to go out there and visit and look at what equipment she was using. One thing we did do, and one of the campaigns we had actually early on was free wills for NHS staff. Then we thought, well, how are we going to meet these people and take will instructions? And we were doing it over Zoom, which we were kind of aware was not the most ideal platform to do it over from a security point of view. And also, are we sure that who we're talking to is who we think we were talking to? I was taking screenshots of my iPad on Zoom while I was talking to people, and then when I got ID through, I was checking it against that. So I think that was one area that we were a bit worried about. And also, you just never know who else is in the room if you're taking will instructions. The camera's pointing in one direction, you're talking to somebody, but you don't know who else is there, so possible risk of duress. We were trying to think of everything in that kind of scenario that might be a risk to us, and doing our best to minimize it. Other than that, yeah, I think those are the main risks we identified, really. Yeah.
Thanks, Mark. That's a really good point I think you make with regards to wills. It's always important to bear in mind where there's a will is a relative, and you never know if that relative could be exerting that unfair pressure. And like you say, you can't be sure who's there. Alistair, I mean, what's it been like, particularly for the work that you do and the work that you do with your clients, when it's come to sort of what have been the biggest risks that you've found when it's come to the move to remote working that you've seen?
Yeah, I think. So I'm going to take this from a different perspective, because obviously we've always been set up to work remotely. I think the challenge from our perspective has come from, I think the relentlessness of work. So it's quite a big move, I think, for people to go from having 2 or 3 video calls a day to maybe having 15. And I think certainly, although people are getting used to it now, I think they found it rather draining, particularly when you couple it with, potentially caring for children at the same time, not being able to go on holiday, even during it looks like we're getting into a harder lockdown again now, but even during the easing, it's still been, I would say most people have not got back into the rhythm of their social life and their outside life. And I think that's definitely taken its toll on people. I think you've got to be really sympathetic to that and work out how to get around that. So we've tried to be really creative with ways of getting people together. I think about 12 colleagues have joined the same golf club. which is quite interesting. So golf is an extremely safe way of socializing during this. But it's just things like that's just one example. It's just anything you can do, I think, to and also those. I actually, just picking up on the point you made about supervision earlier. I think it's really important to make sure that you're still having those one-to-one conversations. Like, it's very tempting to invite multiple people, and you see calls with 10 or 15 people. I'm not a fan of that. I like to. I think it's great to have a quick stand-up with a group. But I still think you need to take the time to have an individual discussion, and sometimes you need to take the time to have an individual discussion with a glass of wine and to let it flow in much the same way as you might do if you wanted to talk to someone in a semi-informal context. So I think just flexing being really sensitive to the needs of individuals, flexing depending on what they're going through, giving them time off when they need it, encouraging them to take holidays. I think all of those things have been really important. And I think as we go into the winter of discontent, I think it will be super important. But I think things are going to be very, very difficult over the next few months.
I think you're quite right. And I think, thank you for raising that issue, and people working in quite difficult circumstances where they could be juggling everything from looking after to also looking after perhaps children and homeschooling them, to as well trying to do their job. And I was conscious at one point, I was getting emails from a colleague at 2 o'clock in the morning at the height of lockdown, and I thought, yeah, they're clearly having difficulties being able to get everything done. And I think we probably all know some people who ended up having to work incredibly hard and are continuing to do so, particularly if you're doing that from home where you might not have a private space where you can work and where you're trying to juggle lots of things at the same time. We will actually be having a panel in our second day tomorrow with regards to that sort of well-being and resilience piece. But thank you very much, Alistair, for flagging that up, because I think it's a pervasive issue that comes across all of our discussions over the next 2 days. I just wanted to flag up a couple of questions that we've had, which are quite interesting. First of all, just with regards to Cyber Essentials, so this is perhaps one for you, Emma. We've had one question on Cyber Essentials. What kind of percentage of firms have the basic accreditation and also the Cyber Essentials Plus? So the most basic standard for any business and the one that clients recognise too. Is that anything you can shed a light on?
Yeah. So I mean, obviously a small percentage, if you take all the companies in the UK, then only a very, very small percentage have got Cyber Essentials, but it's going up all the time. So I think in total, there's about 50,000 companies that have it now since the beginning of the scheme. Until April, when you got a certificate, it lasted forever. It was a loophole in the original scheme. Since April, it only lasts 12 months, so that's good. So as I said, we certify about 1,300 companies a month at the moment, but that's going up quite significantly. And we do about, about 200 Cyber Essentials pluses. So that's about the right level. Until fairly recently, we were a little bit short of law firms, I must say, in terms of the companies that chose to get Cyber Essentials certified. We are seeing a pickup in that, which is really, really great. Some of the law firms that we used to talk to until recently would say, oh, yes, this is very important for our clients. But apparently they were fine, they didn't need it. I think that is changing now. Certainly, the Cyber Essentials controls have come from GCHQ, basically. So GCHQ look at all the ways that companies are getting breached, the most common ways, all the time. And that's what the Cyber Essentials controls are linked to. So these are really, really important controls. Some of them are harder than others. So you have to patch systems with critical updates within 14 days. That's very hard for particularly larger organizations to do. But it's been discussed, and in fact, we're looking again at it now. But that is the area that they see so many breaches happening. So the controls, you don't even need to pay for a certificate. Just read the controls, have a look at the questions online for free and put those in place. If you don't need a certificate, you don't need to pay anything. Sorry, does that answer the question?
I think so. I was just going, David, does anything wanted to add to that at all?
Yeah, I think our biggest encouragement to people is to start and do something, especially small firms slightly don't know where to start, therefore they don't. We would recommend that you put some time aside, and actually this is in the broader subject of business resilience, is put some time aside to think about the risks that you now have and think about them from your policy first. What are you going to allow people to do? What are you going to? How are you going to use your technology to control it? And you can look at some of the technology controls in Cyber Essentials there. But also then look at what your people need to do to play their part. And that doesn't have to be about cybersecurity. That could be around data protection. It's how does your new way of work and what controls have you got in place to bring that within your company's risk appetite, and how are you going to check that those things are actually happening. So, but make a start.
Emma, you wanted to come back on that?
Yeah, I just wanted any small organisation, so that's an organisation that has less than 20 million turnover, gets included Cyber Essentials with included cyber insurance with Cyber Essentials. And so it doesn't cost any more and there's no extra forms. But unless you opt out, you get cyber insurance, and that includes incident response. So as soon as you have Cyber Essentials as a small firm, you have 24-hour technical and legal incident response. So for the smaller firms, that's something that can really help them with their resilience if the worst does happen.
Brilliant, thank you. And I suppose moving on from that, but still on very much the same subject, we've had one question, and I'm going to ask this one of Heather, because the question is, please can you explain what a cybersecurity risk assessment is? And Heather, I know that you're currently working on the second edition of the Law Society's Cybersecurity Toolkit. So what would you sort of say are the essentials that need to go into a cybersecurity risk assessment?
Well, it's going to depend on the size of the firm, the type of equipment you have, the number of employees. There are so many factors that go. A cyber security risk assessment is very much like any risk assessment. You look at all the factors involved. So with cyber, you're looking at the equipment, the software, the people, the location, the level of risk. So those different areas of risk for cybersecurity. So whereas most people think cybersecurity, it's all going to be about your software, whether you have malware on there, whether you have firewalls, things like that. That's one aspect of it, but it's also about where what the traffic is, how often you're updating critical updates and patches to close those vulnerabilities, like David was saying, that the people are looking for those vulnerabilities, but also what type of training is your staff getting to make sure that the risks are covered. So those types of things, as well as what your plans, what plans you have in place if something happens. Do you have that response insurance in place? Do you have backups? Do you have do you do backup testing? Those types of things. So it's a cyber risk assessment is going to be like almost any risk assessment you do, just having to look at all aspects of how cyber can be a risk in your firm and in your practice, and that's going to depend on how your practice uses technology. And maybe someone else like David will have something to add to that as well.
David? Put you on the spot there.
Yeah, I'm basically agree with everything Heather said there. We not all people would say that the same thing if you ask them the question what a cybersecurity risk assessment is. But for us, it's understanding first, how does the business operate? What are the policies that you operate by? For example, is bring your own device allowed? What can people do on social media? And then see how your technology can line up to make those policies true, so you're not just relying on the people to operate in that way. because most of the software that even small firms work on have configurations in them, Office 365, antivirus, your laptops, that people don't configure. They don't switch on the things that are free and they already have. So configure those first, and then make sure you're training your staff. We're big fans of simulated attacks on staff because you can get huge experience from it, and you don't need to embarrass anybody, but the communication of using real live activities you pressure in now in a controlled way rather than letting it happen for real. So yeah, governance, technology, and people is the way we would go about understanding where your vulnerabilities are.
Absolutely. Emma, is there anything you'd add to that, do you think?
No, I mean, every sector has its own issues, and so it's really being aware of the risks, and then you can focus on how to protect those. So, each sector will be in their sector, and going to specialist advisors like Mitigo is always a good thing as well, because Mitigo understand the legal sector, and so they always have a good understanding of what they can advise you.
Thanks, Emma. I'm sure David's check is in the post. Just building on that again, another question we've had from our audience is, if Cyber Essentials is just basic, what else do law firms need to do? I suppose we've partially just sort of looked at that just now, but is there anything in particular you'd say that law firms need to do? Because I think sometimes the danger when you're looking at, well, we've done a cyber risk assessment, we've ticked the box there, or we've ticked the box on Cyber Essentials, it can almost leave you still wide open in terms of vulnerability. And you know, a board might sit there and think, oh yeah, yes, we're fine, we're secure, we've got this, you know, we've got the blue tick in the corner, or we've got we did this risk assessment 2 years ago, we're fine, aren't we? So I suppose we could end up asking that question of what else do law firms need to do, and talk about that for the next 2 hours. But I suppose just putting that to the panel, shall I say one thing from each person, just in terms of what you think firms should do? Emma.
So Cyber Essentials is only defensive controls. It doesn't look at if something does happen, and that's very, very specific. And so Cyber Essentials does not include backup. You know, there's a lot of, oh my goodness, backup so essentials, but Cyber Essentials is just defensive. So a very, very important thing that you also need to do is to have offline backups, and that's the next thing.
Yeah. And indeed test them occasionally.
Exactly, yes, test them. The number of times something happens and people go to their backups and they're blank, you must test them.
Yeah, great. We've been backing up an error message for the last 3 years. Marvellous. Heather.
Yeah, because adding to that is your SRA requirements under the regulations. You're required to actually keep yourself up to understand what your current risks are in terms of cybersecurity. So it is more proactive than the Cyber Essentials. So like she was saying, like regards to, it's not just that defensive, it's the proactive. So that is a regulatory requirement for you to keep on top of things like that as well.
David, is there anything you'd sort of one thing, additional thing that you think firms need to do?
Well, I'd probably add back in the training and the staff, what we'd call staff competence. Getting the culture right so people don't ignore alerts, and they, as somebody, I think it was Heather saying earlier, that they feel confident to ask the question and say, is this real? Don't just trust things.
Yeah. Mark, sorry to sort of put you on the spot. We might be going a bit outside your wheelhouse here, but I mean, it is in your experience, particularly in the role that you've got at your firm, is there one particular thing that you think firms need to be doing when it comes to looking at their cyber risk as a whole?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm one of the directors. I'm also the COLP. And I think the key, I'm trying to narrow it down to one thing. I'm going to say two things. I think communication and due diligence. So our IT is outsourced. We're a small firm, so obviously we can't do our own IT, and that's fairly usual for a firm of our size. But communication is absolutely vital, and research, I suppose, because doing things like this, finding out what the risks are, and then asking very hard, finding your IT for you. So, you know, we're now in a position where we can work remotely if we need to, because we've got new laptops, and they, I believe they are configured and they link through to our PCs at work here. So you see what's on the PC at work, and you just leave them on. Now, so we're having constant conversations amongst ourselves, asking ourselves what the risks are, asking out external people what the risks are, and then asking hard questions of our IT supplier. So that's where we are at the moment with that.
David, you wanted to come in on that?
I just wanted to re-emphasize Mark's point. We say that one of the biggest issues is in cybersecurity is the assumptions that people make. There's a handful of them we talk about, but one of the biggest ones is assuming that your IT is looking after your cybersecurity. I'm afraid they're on the whole not, and especially the smaller you get, then they're not doing it. And you have to at least ask the due diligence questions and get some stuff checked.
And I was just going to come across to Heather, who just wanted to come in there, and then we'll just see Alistair. I'm afraid you'll have the short straw because I'll be coming to you and everyone else has had the opportunity to speak on this, but Heather first of all, then Alistair.
I just actually did want to follow on that, and also what I was saying about your SRA regulations, and I think this ties into a question that was asked on that you hadn't gotten to, but GDPR and data protection 2018 are still a thing, no matter Brexit or no Brexit. You know, when Brexit happens, when we're out of the EU, it's been incorporated into UK law, so that is still going to be a requirement to comply with data protection law, because it has been part of that law. So in terms of not just, and part of that is understanding third-party suppliers. So what Mark was saying about asking those questions, what David reiterated. So your requirement to actually look at the contracts you have with your third-party suppliers of tech, and who will be essentially data processors for you, is part of your responsibility under the law.
Yeah, thank you for that. Indeed, I was going to mention we had that question on GDPR and its applicability to UK law firms after Brexit, and our next panel is actually on compliance and regulatory obligations. So we'll be going into things like adequacy, Brexit, Schrems 2, and all of those juicy issues in our next panel. But just for the avoidance of doubt, thank you, Heather, for confirming that. Alistair, appreciate everyone else had the opportunity there just to sort of go through and talk about what other things they felt that firms should be doing. Is there anything you'd want to add to that?
No, I didn't. Well, look, I think there are probably a couple of points from my perspective. So, firstly, I think it's a really useful exercise to actually gain a situation where you might suffer some form of cyber attack. We've done that a number of times. We've actually had a number of customers that have been hacked, which is quite interesting. So, and so that's actually prompted us to get right into it. But you know, the essential point is you need to be in a position where you can swing into action very quickly, because the first 30 minutes to an hour is extremely important in terms of how you respond. And I think there is a danger of as much a danger of reacting too slowly is of overreacting. So going and kind of telling everyone that you've had a data breach before you actually know that you've had a data breach. So, you know, I think common sense and experience is incredibly important. I think it's useful to have someone on the team who has had that experience, and that's been very useful to us. And if you don't have someone, then make arrangements with a professional person, you know, who can be your phone a friend in that scenario. I think that's very important. I think the other thing as well, I mean, we are almost entirely set up on the M365 environment. So we only use another system if we absolutely have to achieve a specific purpose. We'll call it a point solution. This means that effectively all of our data is stored in the same environment and it's connected. It does make it much easier to manage what's going on. and there are facilities within that environment to check risks. So, to give an example, one of my colleagues was innocently deleting some documents the other day, and it immediately notified the 5 members of our data security team that this was happening, so we could check. She wasn't doing anything wrong, but it's great. It's very comforting to know that. Final point, and this is really going back to, I used to be the data protection officer of ASDA before I set up Psych. We, in that kind of role, you are experiencing attacks and potential vulnerabilities quite regularly. I think something that I learned from back then is information security, data protection. It really shouldn't be a box ticking exercise. It needs to be very focused on risk. I think you need to take a consensus approach to where you are likely to be vulnerable. It's usually fairly obvious. Although there's not too much you can do about bad actors within an organization, I think you can take regular training, as I think Heather suggested, and also regular audits to make sure that people are complying with your own rules. It's common sense, really, but we find it's very effective. So we audit whether people are following our own rules monthly. Can be a bit embarrassing for those who've found not to be following the rules, but I think compliance has gone up immeasurably since we started to do that. So
yeah. Thank you very much for that, Alistair. And I think we're just coming into our last 5 minutes now, so just wanted to cover a few of the questions that have come in from the audience. We've had one in particular from Phil Nixon, saying it would be useful to understand if there is any Law Society campaign to educate in particular small firms when it comes to end-of-life technology, such as an old 2008 server. Now, just from the Law Society perspective, I can confirm that we have things like amongst the practice notes, we've got some quite detailed guidance in terms of use of IT, use of the cloud, use of different systems, and that does cover, I believe, the IT. But Emma, I know that you've got a few thoughts on that, and actually you'll be producing some guidance in the coming weeks as well.
Yeah, so this has been a total nightmare for us because you can't get Cyber Essentials if you're using legacy software. But then software goes into legacy so fast, and it's so complicated depending on what version of Windows you're using. Even the mobile handsets go out of support so quickly, and it's a constantly moving and very complicated. So what we're doing is we've engaged with all the major Google and Apple and lots of others, and we're doing a wiki. So this is going to be constantly updated by us. It's going to be, from our understanding, the best understanding of what the common platforms are, what versions are in support and what aren't. So we're going to be publishing that hopefully by November. It's just going to be freely available. Hopefully you'll be able to get to it through our website, and it's going to also be linked to advice about the most common technical controls.
Thank you very much indeed for that, Emma. And then a question that we just had in from Michael Garson saying, can you suggest a list of suitable questions that external IT contractors would be likely to engage with? And I was just going to let David come in on that first.
Yeah, so we've written 10, so there's a blog on our website, but also it's on the Law Society's website of the 10 things when you're returning to your, let's call it your hybrid way of working, that you should go and ask and check. So yeah, we can post that later on, but it's on our website, on our blog, but it's also on the Law Society's website.
Excellent, thank you. Heather?
I think part of that too is to think about what you need from an IT provider. So sometimes it's, yes, what should you ask, but ask, are they responsible for making sure that your software is up to date and that you've got in life software? Are there any live cyber review? Do they provide that? Are they providing training? Are they providing equipment? Are they providing, so are they providing the things that you need? Are they providing the setting up your system the way, like if you've got 365, it's great if and only if you've got it's set up properly. Otherwise, it is actually kind of a security and compliance nightmare. So are they going to make sure that all those things are happening for you? So the important part is to look at the IT provider and make sure not only are they doing the things that you need them to do, and that's in the contract that they're doing those things, but that they are going to take response. They are going to accept that they are responsible for making sure this is up to date, that they're not saying, oh, you didn't tell us you needed that it's actually in the contract that they're taking that responsibility as well. Doesn't mean that you can then say, oh, my hands are up, I don't have to take responsibility, but it means you're going to share that with them, clearly share that with responsibility with them.
Brilliant, thank you. And then a last question, just in the last 3 minutes. A question that's come in is, in your experience, what are the biggest things that hold law firms back in terms of becoming more cyber resilient? Would anyone like to dive in on that one? Heather, I can see you sort of anticipating that.
Well, because this is one of the things I do all the time. It's and it's something I can relate to too. Is fear. Although I work with technology all the time and I can talk technology, I respects compared to cyber people a Luddite. I don't even like formatting a document. So the idea of having to do presets on 365, I don't. It's fear that we're not going to be able to do that, or resistance to new technology, or that's going to make my life more complicated. So that the biggest thing I find that holds people back is sometimes the older partners, but sometimes I don't consider myself that much of an older partner, but people are just used to working in a certain way, and it makes them uncomfortable. They know how to make paper secure. They know how to do this old legacy system that they had that was set up to be secure then. So they're afraid of that change because that's not something they're familiar with, and they're understandably afraid, but it's getting over that fear and being willing to even make mistakes, because that's okay as long as you're asking the questions and continuing to learn.
Thank you. And just in the last sort of just 60 seconds or so, does anyone like to add to that, just on that last question of what are the biggest things holding law firms back in terms of becoming more cyber resilient? David, Emma?
Yes. So we talk about 3 things. The first one I've mentioned is the assumption that your IT are probably looking after you. Don't assume that. The second one is assuming that you're not a target, which we discussed earlier on. I'm afraid it's a bit like in London. If you leave a handbag on your passenger seat, it will be your car that has the window smashed. They weren't after you, but they were after what you left. But the third thing is we have people say to us, I won't have time to sort the vulnerabilities that you find. Okay, so ignorance is not bliss is the third assumption. So we would encourage people to get started. I think Alistair said it. You know, you're running the business. Sit around a table, put a couple of hours aside, and say, where are our risks? You can start there. Yeah, and that's about resilience in its broader sense.
And I suppose just on that, given that Alistair made that point, I'll just come to you, Alistair, just for any final thoughts there from your experience, what are the biggest things holding firms back in terms of becoming more resilient?
I think, look, we're living in a digital age now. I think it's fair to say that a lot of people lack even a basic understanding of how technology works, and how, particularly how it knits together. I would urge everyone to try and get a basic understanding. It's not very complicated there's some books out there for dummies. I think it's worth, investing 10 hours of your time over the next year to just start to understand the basics, some of the phraseology, some of the taxonomy. And I think it would be a great investment for everyone.
And on that note, there's a book for dummies. There you go. There's loads of them out there, as you say. So it is there. You can get them at various different levels of, sometimes it's a matter of actually starting at the start, at the beginning, which I know is sometimes difficult when you're trying to work out how to get a handle on these things. But can I thank all of our panelists for their the way they've handled the discussion. I think we've covered a lot of ground there, and it's been great to go into it in such a lot of detail. And can I also thank our audience for the questions that you've been able to give us there through the chat facility. So thank you to our panelists for giving up their time to speak to us today and share all of their specialist insights. We're incredibly grateful. And thank you to our audience for your input. And we'll now take a quick 5-minute break. It's just gone at 11:36 now, 4 minutes, and then we're starting our next panel at 11:40. Thank you all very much indeed. Look forward to seeing you all again soon. Thank you. Welcome back, everyone, to our second panel of the day. And we're now on to the area of compliance and regulatory obligations. So I'm very pleased to be able to welcome a new expert panel to the stage. And first of all, I'm going to come to our chair of the Law Society's Technology and Law Committee, Joan, to give us a quick introduction of yourself.
Hello, Peter, and thank you for inviting me to join this panel. And hello to everyone that's listening just now. I'm chair of the Law Society Technology and Law Committee, and also in my day job, just for your interest, I'm head of rights for the BBC World Service Group. World Service broadcasts on TV, radio and online and has over 40 languages. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you, Joan. Kerry.
Oh, hi, I'm Kerry. I'm a member of the Technology and Law Committee as well. And in my day job, I practice in IT, IP and data protection.
Brilliant, thank you. And Andrew.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Peter. I'm Andrew McClure. I'm the head of data protection and law tech at the Law Society.
Excellent, thank you all very much. So we've got our regulatory compliance experts here today, and very pleased to be able to welcome them. And I'm actually going to start off with a question that we had on the last panel. And that question was, what is the impact of potentially Brexit in terms of law firms? Will GDPR apply post-Brexit to law firms, and what do they need to be thinking of? So I just wanted to sort of open out first with that fairly massive question, because we have an hour, and I thought this was obviously a important one to start with. And we've just got a little bit of, I think, interference in the background there, so I'm going to mute when just now, and I think we'll have to make sure when we're not talking, just to hopefully make sure that the audio isn't too bad. But who'd like to kick off on that? Is that too big a one to start off with? Who'd like to start off first on that? Joan, as the chair? I think you're muted, Joan. Sorry.
I was actually going to say I'll pass to Kerry as she's got a raised hand. So thank you.
Okay, in terms of GDPR, I think, is it going to apply post-Brexit? Yes, and the ICO have confirmed, haven't they, that GDPR will continue to apply to us. So I think that means that we have a lot of work to do, particularly if we deal with people based in Europe, we have customers based in Europe, or even a supply chain based in Europe. So I don't know if you want to discuss that, what we should be looking at, or?
I think we may as well start off on that topic, and because I think we can go from there. We can segue into issues around adequacy, and then potentially going into things like Schrems 2, EU-US Privacy Shield or lack thereof, because it's all very much. I see that as a big piece in terms of that international data transfer. So I think we might as well go down that avenue, given I know it's something that our audience was starting to think about even in the last panel.
Yeah, I know, Andrew, you had a lot to say on this. Do you want to comment at this point, or would you like me to carry on?
Thank you, Kerry. I always have a lot to say on Brexit. So, yeah, Peter has set out a couple of the big issues post the Schrems 2 judgment in July, and the question of whether or not the UK gets an adequacy finding from the European Commission. These are big issues that will affect data flows from organizations and businesses in the UK. So I guess the first thing to say is the Law Society is currently revising our guidance. We're speaking with the key players you'd expect us to be speaking to at the Department of Justice, Dcms, Information Commissioner's Office, to understand the timetable for revised guidance in light of the Schrems 2 judgment and its implications for the levels of due diligence that organizations transferring data to third countries need to undertake, and also the implications for January the 1st, 2021, for data transfers coming in from EU member states to the United Kingdom when we will be in the position of being a third country. We need to understand, and most importantly, law firms need to understand in a fundamental way their data flows, where they originate, where they and where they go. So there are lots of questions. We're waiting on guidance to help to start to understand the implications of the Trent 2 judgment and the impacts of the impacts of lacking an adequacy finding by the Commission, which is, I think, quite likely. So, for example, with standard contractual clauses, these could allow UK-based firms to continue to receive EU personal data, but, and correct me if I get this wrong, Terry, because it is quite complicated, but they won't be sufficient to allow UK-based firms or other organizations to transfer EU personal data to third countries, that don't have an adequacy decision. And as well as SCCs, the enhanced requirements for due diligence also apply to binding corporate rules that some firms may have in place if they operate on a multinational basis. So in the meantime, don't wait for the guidance from the authorities, but there are a number of things you can do. Primarily understand in a profound way your data, where it's coming from and where you're sending it. You can think through trade associations or representative bodies about the desirability of codes of conduct or certification schemes that might help with data transfers. Those won't be quick to implement, and they probably won't be in place for the 1st of January 2021 by any means. But there's something you can think about. More immediately, you can think about derogations contained in Article 49 of the GDPR and whether it's possible to use those for your third country transfers. But you're going to have to bear in mind that you can't use them on a repetitive basis, okay? And they're for limited numbers of data subjects, personal data. You also need to do the balancing test with those derogations for your legitimate interests balanced against the rights and freedoms of data subjects. So I'll stop there. There's an enormous amount more we can get into. I'll be look forward to questions in this on this as well. Important, I guess, the last thing I will say, and then I promise I'll shut up. Keep monitoring the Law Society website. We're going to, as I say, we're revising our guidance at the moment. Also monitor the Information Commissioner's Office website as well for the latest information on data transfers post-December 5th.
And you forgot, most importantly of all, Andrew, register for the webinar that the Law Society is doing on data adequacy.
I hadn't forgotten. I was leaving that for later on to lead people on a high of how they can get more information and engage with us further. But you're right, we're doing a webinar, and I believe you're hosting again a specific webinar on data flows post the end of the year, and that's on the 30th of September. And we'll make sure that registrants today and tomorrow get a link to let them sign up for that as well.
Brilliant, thank you, Andrew. I'm going to come to Kerry in a moment, but I just wanted to flag up, because there was a huge amount in that very detailed answer, thank you. But I'm conscious that for all of our 550 odd delegates today, that there's an awful lot of terms flying around there that you may or may not be familiar with. So I think a key one is those SCCs, and we mean by that standard contractual clauses. And for the avoidance of doubt, when you're looking at having a contract now to govern a data transfer going from Europe to the UK, for example, post-Brexit, you want to make sure that those standard contractual clauses are in there. But for the avoidance of doubt, it's not just 1 or 2 paragraphs. It's more like 1 or 2 pages. They're several pages in length. You have to make sure that they are present in all of those contracts. And Andrew, you and I remember a few years ago, we did a big conference on GDPR at Chancery Lane back in the days when we could get hundreds of people into one room. And we had there the compliance officer from a large law firm. And in the run-up to GDPR, they'd had to review over 3,000 individual contracts as part of the GDPR compliance exercise. And to a certain extent, it's now doing the same thing, going through all of those contracts and making sure they've got SCCs in there. So I can see Kerry nodding vigorously at this point. So Kerry, I'm just going to come to you to get your thoughts on this.
I think if I had to summarize some really basic steps, I think it would be make sure that you do your data flow map. So understanding who you talk to and share data with, and check your supply chain. And I think the really important piece of information would be to keep decisions and keep records. So if you're looking at something and you make a decision, document it, because we still have that principle of accountability to look at. So that's really important.
That's an incredibly important point when you say documentation there. It's that sort of being able to demonstrate compliance. I always think if the worst happens, if anything happens, you want to be in a position to turn around to the regulator and go, here is what I've done. You know, we weren't doing nothing, we did something, and here it is, and here's the evidence. So it's never a matter of just, oh yeah, I went ahead and did that. Well, where's the minute of the meeting where you confirm you did that? Where's the record of that action being done? Who was responsible for it? Have that very often electronic, but paper trail in place. So that if the worst does happen, remember what Heather said in the last panel, hope for the best, plan for the worst. Make sure you've then got plenty of evidence that you can point to say, well, these were the things that we did. This is what we did to prepare for Brexit. This is what we did to prepare for no deal. This is what we did to make sure that we could carry on functioning. Joan, I know you wanted to come in.
Yes, and I would back up what both Andrew and Kerry are saying, that obviously this will increase the amount of work. One point that I saw from the Schrems decision is that we will no longer have the US Privacy Shield. Any transfer of data outside the EEA, you'd be having to add due diligence, looking at that country, looking at not just the laws of that country, the politics of that country as well. So I think this will probably be a new thing for some of the members to think about.
I think you're absolutely right, Joan, because of course, for the last 40 years when we thought, okay, we're inside the EU, and for the last 25 of those being inside the single market and its forerunners, to suddenly find that, okay, the UK is going to be outside that European economic area of the 27 EU member states plus Norway, Iceland and Liechtenstein, means that we have to look at those data transfers and scrutinise them in a way that we simply haven't had to worry about for a generation. And of course, a generation ago, we didn't have the volume of data transfers that we have now. So it is sort of coming at a existing process in a totally new way through a totally new prism. And I think Andrew's point is well made in terms of there will be guidance coming out on this. Unfortunately, we can't wait for it. So it's a matter of press the button now to start making sure the larger organisation, the more work that's going to have to be required on this. But I'd say for any organisation, 22nd of September now, and I'm afraid the clock is ticking. And if the current mood music coming out from the European Commission is anything to go by, as well as the mood music coming out of London, then, we have to, again, prepare for the worst, but hope for the best. Kerry, I can see you nodding again there on that.
Oh, I would just agree with everything you've just said.
Yeah.
Absolutely, planning and keeping evidence. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so that's very much the sort of, I think, the key issue in terms of regulatory compliance when it comes to international data transfers. But coming back to the more sort of the issue for our panel to talk about today as a whole is that sort of compliance and meeting regulatory obligations in the context of using technology and using technology to deliver legal services. So I just wanted to sort of ask what really we feel the opportunities are for the positive use of technology for organisations, both for law firms, for in-house departments, for those in local authorities or in academia, or lawyers work in different areas. What are the positive uses of technology that we think are out there in terms of the opportunities available?
I'm happy to start on this one, Peter.
Sure.
So, taking it from the in-house perspective, it's really important as in-house lawyers that we're really connected with the business, and we are no longer in the office. We're no longer having the chats over a cup of tea, going to the kitchen and saying what's happening, what this board's coming up next week, what does that mean, and talking to our key stakeholders. So it's very much business stakeholders is the way that we work, and by having the facility to do things online in the group, through the Microsoft Teams, through the Zoom, that technology has actually, it's not replaced, but it has actually enabled that connection to continue. So I think that's something just generally that we're feeling across our businesses and in-house generally. And I think it's also about, by having everyone on these calls, sometimes decisions can be made quicker, which I think was something that was brought up in the last panel.
Thanks, Joan. Kerry, and then I'll come to Andrew.
I would just agree with what Joan has just said in terms of being able to make decisions quickly, so you can streamline your practice and become more efficient, which of course is good for the bottom line. In terms of your client care and your service delivery, if you're having secure web conferences, for example, team meetings, when we communicate verbally as well as visually. So those types of technologies really, I think, enhance the communication that we have and can help us deliver a better service to our clients. But I would say that possibly different practitioners from different fields might have different challenges and then different opportunities as a result. So commercial lawyers, for example, might be well adapted to this, but possibly people working in the legal aid system might face different challenges. How do they communicate, for example, with their clients if they're on a police station call, for example? So I think different areas of the profession will have different opportunities and different challenges.
Thanks, Kerry. Andrew?
Yeah, so generally I see an awful lot of creativity and novel approaches. It's also been an opportunity, I think, for lots of solicitors and firms to take stock of the technology they've already got and exercise it vigorously and learn how to use it, because it's possible that everything from your CRM to your most basic word processing kit and video conferencing kit hasn't been really sweated in your firm, in your business until now. So it's been great. There's also been, I think, more awareness of the cloud and the benefits and risks associated with cloud use. And also much stronger light has been shone on cybersecurity. And for every case of sloppy practice, there've probably been 5 or 6 at least of enhanced practice and awareness raising around cyber issues. So, as always, where there are risks, there are opportunities, and I think by and large our profession has been pretty good about finding the opportunities where they exist.
Thanks, Andrew. I was just thinking as well, when we're talking about sort of opportunities and positive uses of technology to really help the profession, to help clients and perhaps really change the way we're delivering services. I was just thinking actually whether this might be a good opportunity just to talk about a few of the, in general terms, a few of the sort of products that you and I came across during our work last year, where we went out and did a number of roadshows around the country on law tech. And on a few of those, we were actually able to bring some of the suppliers in to actually talk to the audience. And we saw some really innovative suppliers in there who had looked at certain very cumbersome things about the delivery of legal services. And I'm thinking in particular about 4 Milli, for example, where they'd sort of looked at a thing that's a hindrance and a problem, and I think a bit of a real pain for the client to have to go through. and a real paper chase for the lawyer, and they totally revolutionised how it worked. So I was thinking of that, and also the sort of work on advice through the RCJ. I was just wondering if you wanted to just talk a little bit about those, just in terms of the positive, engaging use of technology.
Yeah, absolutely, Peter. Thanks for the opportunity to say something about our activities last year. It seems a million years ago now. Of course, we're in a completely different world. And of course, if, as I hope, we'll be able to get out and do more of direct engagement around the country in 2021, we'll be starting at a very different place in terms of the general levels of, I think, awareness of tech, awareness of cyber, awareness of the considerations that legal businesses will want to consider as part of their business planning. But I think you and I were both struck with the tremendous amount of creativity around particularly young legal minds who may or may not have technology backgrounds, but will bring colleagues and associates into startups with that technology background and their ability to put themselves in the position of clients or solicitors and say, well, how can we do a better job? You mentioned for me, how can we do a better job of looking at a process, deconstruct it, and use technology to put it back together again more effectively and efficiently. It's through the Law Society's engagement with Barclays Eagle Labs and our work with the startup residents at Notting Hill in London, we're able to see up close some of the exciting work that's been done, and actually a shout out to many of our local law societies as well, who are partnering with universities and colleges around the country and legal services providers, legal aid providers to enhance the use of technology and new approaches to legal services.
Yeah. Thanks, Andrew. I mean, I was really struck by, for example, when we ended up hearing from RCJ advice, and that ended up, in terms of being able to put people in touch with lawyers who could actually help, even on a pro bono basis, with being able to advise people who are in particularly vulnerable conditions. They put together a fantastic tool that showed all the firms across the country that were in a position to help, and at least it could direct people who were in need of that assistance so that they could go and get that service easily. And it's little things like that that I think can make a real difference when it comes to that unmet legal need and really embracing the technology and using it for innovation to provide services in a way that there simply wasn't that help and advice there before. You could physically ask someone, as it turned out, at RCJ for that, but you couldn't be able to have that available nationally. And I think that's where some of the opportunities really do lie. Just before we sort of go on to the flip side of that question, I just wanted to see, Kerry and Jennifer, I think you wanted to add there in terms of the sort of the positivity, the positive uses of technology and the opportunities it creates.
I think the current coronavirus pandemic has shown us that technology is a positive thing, because without it, we wouldn't be able to work and deliver our legal services, which would affect access to justice. So I definitely think it's a positive thing, and it's really exciting at this moment in time, seeing the way that things are working and technology is adapting to our needs. So it's great.
Yeah, and I would just add that actually it's giving each practice area a time to take a step back and think about, actually, we normally in the office and we have lots of paper, and how can we change the way we work? So in terms of it, this time, it gives people a chance to look at their actual operations and maybe change what they're doing. And it brings about, I think, as everyone says, bring about change at a much faster pace than would have happened normally.
I think that's a really good point, Joan. I was talking to a partner at one law firm a couple of weeks back who was saying that when they'd looked at their end of year last year, he was looking at their overheads and looked at paper and thought, wow, we're printing far too much stuff here. I'm going to personally take it as a mission to lower the amount of paper we're using by 30%. Let's really hit that budget. So, of course, he's now sat here in September and the budget's down by 90% on what it was, because, of course, you know, it's very difficult to sometimes print stuff at home. And indeed, now people are used to receiving services in a different way. So it's kind of showing some of the change by circumstance, but certainly a significant change in terms of the experience for the end recipient, the end user. I just wanted to sort of flip, we've tried to sort of accentuate the positive there, looking at some of the opportunities for the use of technology. But I wanted to now flip that around and talk about some of the sort of examples of poor practice that you may have come across during the lockdown. And just to give you an example of the sorts of things I'm looking at, I heard of one firm who'd gone to great trouble to set up a way of being able to check ID digitally online. So the idea was that they'd do a video call, and that the person, you know, that the client would be talking, and they'd either hold up, you know, they'd hold up a copy of ID and then hold up like a newspaper or something to show that it was on that day and date, and this was the ID. And the idea was that the admin could then take a screenshot, save that to the case management system, everyone's happy. And then they suddenly found out that the admin person wasn't doing that, and they were actually taking a photo on their mobile device, taking the photo of the screen, emailing that photo to their email account, and then saving it from that. And of course, it turned out that their mobile device was a fruit-based device, shall we say. Other operating systems are available. So of course, that meant that that rather important client confidential information was then being shared in their personal cloud, and not on a business system. So it was almost like despite the best efforts to engineer a secure, time-saving way of using technology, sometimes problems can come into it. So that's sort of one example of, I suppose, where you get sort of poor practice. I just wanted to ask you all if you'd what sort of examples you'd come across, in particular during the lockdown and over the last 12 months. Kerry, do you want to kick us off?
I wouldn't say poor practice as such, but I think there have been challenges in people understanding what their firm's practices are, maybe, and also where they can turn to for advice. So I think it's really important that if you've gone to the trouble of saying this is the way we do things, document it, make sure that everybody knows it, make sure you've got a record, and then audit that. And of course, there's lots of great advice and guidance out there from regulators, trusted authorities. So yeah, but it's the same thing that we saw pre-lockdown, really, isn't it? People using laptops on trains where everybody could read their screens. So it's just being aware, I think, and training people and documenting that.
Indeed, and I think the challenge was because for many organisations they had to switch to remote working at speed, under great pressure earlier in the year, and sometimes that's where some of the problems ended up arising, because let's face it, if you're worried about making sure the business still functions, sometimes regrettably compliance becomes a second, third, fourth, fifth priority in some instances, which can then lead to a difficult journey then back to being able to turn around and say, yes, we are compliant. Joan, I was just wondering if you'd heard of what sort of experiences you'd come across there.
Well, I kind of call this temptations. You know, we're all suddenly put in a different situation. So there are a lot of temptations out there, and the temptations being, you've got a client phoning up, you're desperate to get something out there quickly, you can't get your business laptop working, or you can't get connected to the system, so you start sending a WhatsApp message. So there's like, we do things in our personal lives, which, as you say, it's not as secure as our business system. So I think this has exposed vulnerability, and I think Emma, in the last panel, Emma was saying that it was a bring your own device, kind of not bring your own child, but bring your own device to work day, and the risks around that. So that's the temptations, and I agree with Kerry. Actually, a lot of this is about communicating your firm's policy and reminding them, actually, we're in a difficult situation, but you still have your obligations, your professional obligations, confidentiality being a key one, accountability. And we also talk a lot about people being at home with their family. And one thing I was thinking about this morning was obviously some of our other lawyers who are sharing flats with other people. And this is kind of like not talked about so much actually, but the thought about confidential documents being on the breakfast table of a shared house. You know, there's a lot of things to think about because you're not in the office actually, and conversations being overheard, as you said. So I think it's really about having the firm making it clear that actually we're in this situation. These are the policies. These are who you can speak to. I think Heather mentioned in the last panel, it's about knowing who to speak to, and it's also about where do we stand. We're not actually letting everything go out the window because we're in this situation.
I think that's a really good point, and I think the idea when you make the point as well about people working, you could have solicitors working in shared homes or shared flats. I was very conscious during the lockdown, particularly in those first few weeks when it was gorgeous weather. If you sort of sat out on the balcony, think, oh, this is very nice, doing a little bit of working from home, and then you suddenly realise, can my laptop actually be seen by the people in the other balcony several feet away? Yes, it can. Time to invest in a privacy screen. But it also makes you think, I better be careful about the phone calls I might be having and making sure they can't be overheard. I did hear of in one sort of in West London, they said they perfectly overheard a stockbroker in the adjoining garden going through some incredibly complex deal, bellowing down the phone, who clearly didn't think he could be heard. So they took the opportunity when it was clap for carers to just say, by the way, we heard everything in great detail. You might want to go inside next time. So there's been a rich tapestry of incidents like that. Andrew, is there anything you wanted to add at all?
Yeah, thanks, Peter. I think most of the points I would make have been made. The only thing I would add maybe is, and I think we talked around this in the last panel, did as well. I think there's an added challenge as well as getting your security right for the technology you're using and your ways of working. It's also the challenges around new patterns of line management associated with lockdown and legal services firms, and where the traditional ways of oversight maybe from office-based working were thrown up in the air, and everybody's working at home. Those patterns needed re-examination, and perhaps in terms of oversight, and certainly training's been mentioned a number of times. Really, really important. I think hopefully as it becomes clear that we're not getting out of a home-based working patterns for the most part in our industry, or indeed in much of the rest of the economy over the winter, and we're going to hear more about that from the Prime Minister today. Hopefully training will be something, if it's not already near the top of the priority list for firms to consider. It will move there rapidly.
Yeah, I think you're quite right, Andrew, and I think that training very often does get missed in the scheme of things, or sometimes it's just done as a sort of tick box. Oh, we'll just do this 5-minute online program, we'll just answer this questionnaire, when actually it's got to be more focused on each individual, what their role is, what their responsibilities are, and the sort of risk points around that in terms of how their role may have changed in the speed that it's moved from being potentially office-based to being entirely 24/7 home-based. Joan, you wanted to come in?
I just wanted to add that actually I think there's an assumption that everyone can work the technology. And I think it's really important because obviously there's different levels of understanding or ability to grasp this quickly. So I think firms also need to think about that, how they're supporting and ensuring that either there are webinars or actually one-to-one to make it, because to be effective and efficient, which is what everyone is trying to do to deliver the same client level of service, they actually need to have people who can actually be familiar with and happy with the technology that they're given to use.
I think that's a good point, both in terms of people's comfort with technology and also the accessibility of it. So I just wanted to sort of move to now to sort of say, what do we think the challenges are for those particularly working in the regions where you might be outside of urban areas. So I'm thinking in particular of some of the, the West Country, the North, Wales, even parts of East Anglia, where you've got challenges in terms of things like broadband and infrastructure that can mean that things aren't necessarily as available as you might think that they are. If you're sat with a wonderful fibre connection in the centre of the city, you might think, oh, it's like this for everyone. But anyone who's taken a trip to the country knows that is not the case, particularly if you find yourself in the West Country or in Wales in particular. So I just wanted to look at that sort of challenges in terms of things like broadband and then devolution and other challenges that come in as well. Kerry, can I come to you first?
Yeah, I suppose broadband connectivity could be an issue. I suppose it's something to think about, but not every rural area has deficient broadband. Just saying. In terms of issues, I suppose it's really in terms of devolution, understanding that there are different rules that apply, there are different responsibilities, and it's understanding how those two things actually marry. So particularly if you're trading, as I'll call it cross-border, it's not really, it's within the UK, isn't it? But England and Wales, it's understanding the differences there. And you can see the differences in terms of the way that the coronavirus pandemic has been dealt with. There are different rules. So it's just being aware, really, and understanding your obligations and what that means for your own compliance.
Thanks, Kerry. Anything you'd like to add to that, Joan?
I just think there'll be a huge demand for better broadband speeds because effectively more and more people will continue working from home a longer term. So I think it's probably a bigger discussion in terms of like where the country is going and how much money is going into that, which is bigger than the panel. But I think it's not going to go away as a discussion topic.
Yeah, I think it's a crucial question, and I find it interesting. I'm actually based here in the north of England, and I have a 20-minute train journey from Sheffield to the office each day. It's been interesting over the course of about the last 4 years, areas that did have really poor broadband coverage, that has improved. But I know that some areas are still sat there waiting, and it is a real challenge, which may now particularly we might be taking one step back with some of the old Huawei kit being ripped out in the coming years before then that's replaced under the government's new 5G scheme. Kerry.
I was just going to say the other thing as well, I suppose, and it's picking up on Joan's point, the more that we work from home, the more demand there's going to be on the infrastructure. So I think the UK as a whole is going to face these challenges moving forward. But yeah, that's where technology can help. Mm-hmm.
Andrew?
Yeah, speaking of technology and evolution, Peter, I just wanted to jump in and say that for those who have lost track of where England stands with its COVID track and trace app, we're due to get that on Thursday this week. Again, we may hear more from the Prime Minister on the app later. I would imagine, and Kerry will know far more about this than I do. I'm in rural East Bedfordshire, but I don't know, Kerry, whether there are implications for firms and potential complications for firms that either have kept a door open with maybe a skeleton staff or aspire to opening on high streets. If you're in the marches and you've got a Welsh app and you've got an English app for track and trace purposes, and you're trying to manage your health and safety obligations, your SRA obligations, look after your cybersecurity and your client's best interests, it's quite a load, really. So just wanted to raise the fact that there's for those firms and those of our members who are either currently in offices or perhaps they're meeting clients on client premises, I don't know. If you're in the marches, I imagine there are added dimensions that the rest of us are unaware of to all of this.
Thanks, Andrew. I think that's a really important point with regards to the changes. And certainly, like you say, if you've got the app, the Welsh app on your phone and the English app on your phone, what you've probably got is a flat phone at the end of that. If the story's about its appetite for people's batteries and to go by. But Kerry, you wanted to come in?
No, and I think for the reasons that you've identified, that the complexity of the situation, it's really important that your colleagues understand what their responsibilities are. So again, it comes back to, doesn't it, having a very simple guideline. These are the rules, and then behind that, having an explanation as to why it is you're doing what you're doing, and just make sure that everyone understands what it is they're supposed to do. It's training, isn't it? It's really key.
Indeed, it is. We keep coming back to that training and the importance of that being effective training at that as well. I just wanted to sort of turn this, well, actually building on one point that Andrew made, but just with regards to the sort of when it comes to potentially opening offices, seeing clients, so the sort of that risk appetite around face-to-face meetings with clients and whether you do that going to see the client or doing it in the office. But before I do, I just wanted to say, if anyone's got any questions on our YouTube feed, do please feel free to give us any key questions that are on there. And then if you put that into the chat that's on there, so below the red bar on the screen, there should be the chat button that you can press, and you can enter the chat there. And if you do have any questions for us, please let us know, and we'll come to those. But so yeah, just turning Andrew to that sort of point around. As I say, face-to-face meetings, how we meet with clients. Obviously, a lot of work is now being done over the phone and through video conferences. But for certain instances, that the client may still want to meet face-to-face, though there could be another reason why you need to meet them and either go out and see them or see them in the office. What do you think the risk appetite is around that sort of crucial element of supporting the client and client care at the moment?
Just quickly, from my perspective, in my virtual Chancery Lane office, I saw a lot of interest from members asking questions around how do I balance the different obligations I have to the SRA, to health and safety, to my clients, to my staff. Lots of questions around, and particularly when the Westminster government was considering an app for the first time. We're going to have Mach 2 this week, but of course it was Mach 1. I don't know whether the enthusiasm or the interest or people have just moved on, I guess. But it's the same level of questioning about how an op might work in terms of opening up my firm or and the potential for access to justice issues potentially, as well as can I ask my staff? Can I insist that my staff download the app and turn Bluetooth on? All of these kinds of questions we're getting less of than we were originally. So I don't know what that means exactly, and whether people are just a bit overwhelmed with the appearance of a second wave and the potential for new lockdowns. It might be a bit short of the lockdown we had previously. Perhaps people are just overwhelmed at the moment. I don't know, but again, I think we'll see potentially more interest in this space with events this week. But I'd be interested to hear from Jerry and Joan what they're hearing and their experience of this.
Thanks, Andrew. I'll just come to Kerry and then Joan.
The one thing I think that might be worth mentioning is insurance implications as well. So we have our insurance, and sometimes our insurers require us to do certain things. So whilst we've also got to add that into the mix, haven't we? So it's what do our professional obligations say? What do our, well, I suppose, moral obligations say, which is a different point. But, and then include the insurers as well.
Yeah. Thanks, Kerry. Joan?
Looking at various solicitors firms' websites this morning and last night, I was thinking about this and thinking, it's been great what people have been doing. They've made it very clear to their clients what our policy is. And I think that is one of the key things, because they generally link to the government websites, because what we're all struggling with is that the rules can change. And so I think it's really important about transparency, and there's also the key things about asking yourself, do you really need to come into the office? Do you really need to meet with that client? So there are duty of care things to think about as well. Another thought that struck me, which I don't think has been touched upon much, but I've seen in the press, is that some solicitors or any business may ask to work more flexibly going forward, so they're not in the office. So they might have a different employment arrangement with you, and also some might actually want to work from sunnier climes, work abroad. So actually, and this is starting to come up as a question, and I think it applies to the legal profession as well. And I think what's interesting about it is actually, although technology can actually connect us all, and I've spoken to people recently, and they're saying, well, actually it made no difference. He always lived up north, and I was down in London. So it actually is working. But once you start going outside the UK, and particularly with Brexit, you're looking at what the employment rules, the tax, the social security. There's a lot of other compliance things to think about. So I'm just going to float that out there, because I'm sure that's going to come up as a question in the future. Thanks.
No, I think that's a really important point, actually, Joan, that it's almost like the genie's out of the bottle now. So ultimately, people can end up working in a highly distributed manner in different jurisdictions, different locations, potentially wide apart within, not just far apart within a country, but potentially in multiple countries. Funny enough, I was on a series of workshop conference calls last week where even though all the calls were taking place in midday UK time, there was one person who was joining from Australia each day. So of course it was dark over there by the time they were dialing in, which always took some getting used to, because they had big patio doors behind them, but it was always entirely dark in the background. But it's becoming habitual. It is normal, and it's not something, after a while you become very used to it, but it's the fact that I think that more distributed way of working is definitely going to be here to stay. We've got, in the last sort of 10 minutes or so, I just wanted to sort of start, because compliance is such an important piece, it's an all-pervasive piece across everything that we do, and we are a heavily regulated profession. I just wanted to sort of ask each panelist what you feel the best sources of information are out there on best practice when it comes to embracing technology. I mean, let's face it, who knows what the Prime Minister is going to say in his announcement this evening. He could end up saying, would you all mind working from home again? Possibly, forget the stuff we said about going and keeping prep in sandwiches. Instead, he says, right, everyone has to go and work from home. And if anyone's then sort of, oh, great, we have to unpack this system, what are the sources of guidance and information that we should really be directing our members to? Should we come to Andrew first? Yeah.
All right. Well, as you might expect me to say, the Law Society website is a great place to start. So we have a newish and regularly refreshed cybersecurity landing page, which is a really good place to go. It's got a news digest of latest information, a guide, various guides, various checklists for solicitors, checklists for things like general safety, reviewing your assets, making response plans, and importantly, and we've stressed this today, training staff. So lots of information there. There are links to 4 relevant practice notes that we revised over the course of the last 6 months. So our practice note on cloud computing, property and registration fraud practice note, protecting your firm if you fall victim to a scam practice note, and using law tech in your practice. So lots of information there. I think it's strikes the right balance between enough detail with enough links and also being digestible. So recommend you have a look at that. We had an excellent presentation to kick off this morning from Karen at the National Cybersecurity Center. Almost any of the tools on the NCSC website are worth checking out. I would reiterate, if you haven't used or looked at Exercise in a Box, it's free. You can get we talked about the importance of training. You can get all of your colleagues, your fee earners, your staff, your non-legal professionals together to rehearse a cyber incident. And it's also fun. And it's on the website, Exercise in a Box. Karen talked about it. Really recommend that and the other links and sources of information on the NCSC website. And also the Information Commission's website for the latest on data flows, what happens in the likelihood we don't get an adequacy finding. Keep looking on the Law Society's website for links and events, such as the Data Flows webinar that you will be hosting on the 30th of September. Peter, with participation from the European Data Protection Office, as well as the Law Society's Brussels office. So the triumvirate, the Law Society's website, the National Cybersecurity website, National Cybersecurity Center's website, and the Information Commissioner's website. Keep those links in your favorites and keep checking in.
Thanks very much for that, Andrew. And I think a couple of things I'd just flag up there actually is a number of those practice notes that you mentioned have been refreshed this year. So they're very much full of tips, help, guidance that is applicable for practice in a post-COVID world. So the scams practice note and also that law tech one, I think, are both sort of renewed issues for 2020, new versions of those notes. So even if you've looked at those in the past, we've actually revised them quite heavily to take account of the changing environment this year. Also, the National Cybersecurity Centre, we keep saying about training. And I think that Exercise in a Box is an excellent example of interactive training where together you and your colleagues, be it if you're in a team, in a department, or it could be for a board to work through, going through that Exercise in a Box really gets you thinking about, okay, if the worst happens, what would we do? And it comes back to the point that Kerry, you're making about making sure you've got that evidence trail to make sure that, if the worst happened, you could say, well, look, we did plan this and we did do the sort of brainstorm. But sometimes it's only by putting yourself in that situation that you start to ask yourself the questions about, oh, right, well, what would we do if this happened at 7 o'clock on a Friday evening? What would we do if so-and-so from IT couldn't be raised because they're on leave? What would we do if we couldn't raise, what would we do if our system isn't working? How do you then get people together? It's all of these sorts of challenges you really need to think about. And the Exercise in a Box puts you on the spot to make you think about that and start thinking about those fail-safes. But Kerry, what do you think some of the good sources of advice and best practice are out there?
Yeah, I think those three sources that you've referenced are excellent, and they've got some really nice, easy to understand guidance and checklists, which are really helpful in terms of working through things. I'd also add as well to that some of the local law enforcement work that goes on as well. So if you get in touch with your local regional organised crime unit, for example, they might have some free training. There's sometimes some tech solutions that you might be able to use to help protect your organisation from a cyber security attack. So it's in addition to that, it's worth looking at your local ROCU and seeing what they're doing.
Indeed, certainly I think it depends, but some forces in particular have been really good, really proactive, in particular coming out during the recent months. They're making themselves available to come along to training sessions and conferences, and making themselves available to engage and offer tips and help and best practice, even if it just comes down to saying, look, if you have an incident of fraud, let us know on this number, work with us, let's try and learn from our experiences. Joan.
Oh, yes. I would also add cloud computing practice note, because as firms are increasingly moving to use cloud, that's really a good starting point to understand it. And the second thing I would say is when we did our law tech seminars around, in different places, and you and Andrew, Peter have done more than me. I think there was also a feeling amongst local law firms, like could they maybe get together and share experience in terms of what law tech they're using, because that law tech might assist them in compliance and assist them in due diligence exercises. So I would encourage each of your firms locally to start those conversations going, so then you can have a look and see if you can share experience.
I think that's a really, really important point, Joan. I've heard of several local law societies that sort of have compliance forums, where it's sort of cops and coffers from different firms that come together for mutual warmth and comfort to try and reassure each other in terms of, are we doing the right thing here? And I think it can be quite interesting to sometimes use those opportunities to perhaps bring in a couple of vendors, have a few conversations about some of the systems that are out there, share different anecdotes about different firms' experiences. And it just helps people, I think, sometimes to sort of break through that, learning from other people's experiences and then learning about what may or may not work for their firm. Because all firms are different, all clients are different. It does depend very much on your sort of practice area and sometimes the demographics in terms of who the clients are and if you're dealing with businesses or consumers. But it's a matter of really finding the right systems that work. And sometimes it's actually, if you actually sit down and talk to the clients, you might be quite surprised about how they actually want to receive their services. I think sometimes we've presumed in the past, and this is a common thing I've found this year, is we've presumed clients wanted to get it in letter, have it in writing, and then you actually go to them and they say, no, actually, we would have been happy with it via email. Or even sometimes they say, I get 500 emails a day. If you could provide me the information in a different way, I'd be more than happy with that. So sometimes it's a matter of really finding out how your clients want to work. And you might be sometimes quite surprised with the answers that you get. Just in the last sort of 120 seconds or so that we've got, I just wanted to just say to our panel, are there any sort of key takeaways that you'd sort of want to give to our audience with regards to compliance and regulatory obligations, just with regards to where we are now, the fact that we could be going into dealing with new restrictions in the coming hours potentially, let alone days and weeks, with the Prime Minister speaking later today. Just any particular takeaways that you'd give to people to think about? I'll come to you first, Kerry.
Okay, I would say, first of all, don't panic. It feels very daunting, doesn't it, right now? But I mean, we've referred to some really great sources of advice and guidance. So go and take account of that, and again, document your decision and talk to your colleagues. That would be my tip.
Okay, thank you very much, Kerry. Joan?
Yeah, I actually was going to say don't be overwhelmed. So it's interesting. You had the same feeling, actually. I think keep it simple in terms of reminding people we have the same obligations we had pre-COVID. And I think that nothing's changed. We've still got our duties of confidentiality, client care, and it is about repeating those basic professional obligations that we have.
Yeah, thank you very much, Joan. And finally, Andrew.
Thanks, Peter. Yeah, I would echo what Kerry and Joan have said. I think it's reassuring that regulators have taken a proportionate approach, a measured approach to compliance issues during lockdown. Keep talking. Think about training. Keep yourself informed. We're going, it's not going to be any rest for the sector with the end of the year and finally leaving the European Union and everything that means for our sector and for our clients, indeed, and particularly on data flows. So keep yourself informed. Keep talking to your staff, whether they're fee earners, lawyers, or non-legal staff, and think about how you can enhance training.
Indeed. Can I say thank you to all three of our panelists, our specialists, for being able to take the time to join us for our in-depth panel now, looking at the whole sort of perspective of compliance and regulatory obligations when it comes to the use of technology in delivering legal services. I think it's been a really insightful panel, actually, being able to cover everything from Brexit and Schrems and international data transfers down to the things that you need to think about if you're just working delivering services for your clients every day. So thank you all very much for being able to give us your insights, your anecdotes, and the benefit of your experience. That is now the end of our panel. It's now 12:40. We now have a quick 5-minute break before panel session 3, efficiency, making the most of your existing technology, and that will begin at 12:45. So quick 5-minute break. Thank you all to our panelists. Thank you all very much. See you in 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Welcome back to our third and final panel of the day, and we're now on making the most of existing technology. So I'm pleased to welcome another set of specialists to our virtual stage for this panel. I'm going to allow them each to introduce themselves in a far more thorough way than I'm sure I would be able to. So first of all, Christy.
Hi, thank you so much, Peter. I'm Christy Guimont, and I'm a Senior Manager for Innovation and Engagement at White & Case. So I lead our global innovation team. We have responsibility for a number of different things, including new ways of working, new processes, new services, or better services for our clients. So really wide-ranging, and I've got a pretty long history working in similar roles within the industry for Ashurst and Bird & Bird as well.
Brilliant. Thank you, Christy. Next, Helen.
Hi everyone, I'm Helen Lowe, Head of Legal Operations at EasyJet. Similar to Christy, I have a bit of a long history with legal operations, having previously worked at the Co-op, and I am responsible for technology, process improvement, panel and external relationships, finance and HR within the team.
And Catherine.
Hi everyone, I'm Catherine Bamford. I am the CEO and founder of BAM Legal. We are a legal engineering company that helps mainly large law firms and in-house teams to improve the way they deliver legal services by implementing and scaling the use of technology.
Excellent. Thank you all very much and welcome. So our panel this afternoon is making the most of existing technology, and I suppose just to frame that, I just wanted to ask the first question of what do we mean when we refer to using existing tools, existing technology? You would like to come in on that first?
I'm happy to. I think we're at a kind of unique point at the moment, obviously, with everything that's going on, and if we look at the last crisis we had, the last financial crisis, it was all about doing more for less, and everyone looked to technology and everyone looked at buying new tools. And what quickly happened as things improved was it became a bit of a competition of buying the newest, shiniest tool to get a bit of a press release or win an award or something like that. So I think now, unfortunately, we're at the point where a lot of law firms, maybe a bit different with in-house, and it'd be interesting in Helen's take on this, but with law firms, that they have a lot now of existing technologies and softwares and tools, some of which perhaps aren't being used quite as well as they could be, serious license fees being paid for them. So we're talking about all those tools that everyone's acquired over the last, let's say, 5 to 10 years, and how now with this current crisis, how we can now do more and better with what we already have, rather than looking to acquire more new shiny things.
Indeed, it's that matter of, I suppose almost to a certain extent, doing more with less and getting the most out of the tech that you have. And if my experience of my firm's case management system is anything to go by, I'm still finding out what it does, and we've been using it for 2 years. So I'm just speaking to one of the developers, and they say, "Well, you know, you can use it to do this." And you're like, "No, I have no idea." But that's part of the tapestry. But Helen, what are your thoughts on that?
So I think existing technology in-house tends to be very, very different to in practice. It's a much less developed area. The case for investment is always a lot harder to build, and so actually existing technology from our perspective tends to be your standard suites, but even when you're looking at something like the standard Microsoft Office suite, you know, to come back to your point, Peter, you know, we aren't using anything like the capability that Office 365, for example, can deliver into us as a team. There's still an awful lot of using Word as if it were a typewriter. There's an awful lot of using Excel to do a bit of adding things up, and not really embracing all of the change and opportunity that there is with something like 365. So very much for certainly for EasyJet as an in-house team, and certainly in the experience I've had before, the Office suite is very much the existing technology that we need to start to leverage much more effectively.
I think that's a really good point when it comes to getting the full use and functionality out of 365. I mean, that's just it. Particularly in law firms, you do see it being used as a typewriter, and it's the Tipex on the screen that's always a bit of a giveaway. But I suppose for the view from private practice, Christy, sorry to put you on the spot, but what would your thoughts be?
Well, I think in private practice, it is a bit of a combination of both. I think I completely agree with Catherine about Big Law. Big Law did really go out and go to town on new and shiny tools in the last few years. And so, yes, the reality is that a lot of big law firms do have these tools sitting on their existing stack and aren't getting the most value out of them, along with what Helen has alluded to. We also, I think, in private practice don't get the most out of our Microsoft tools, out of some of the case management systems, as you've alluded to. I think that's certainly true of big law. I think in smaller and medium-sized law, the landscape is slightly different. Because those license fees tend to be rather large, as Catherine has alluded to. The smaller and medium-sized law firms don't tend to have quite as many, and so they're really trying to get the most out of their really historic and legacy systems like Microsoft. So it's a real mixed bag in private practice, to be honest.
I think you're absolutely right, but I suppose my next question comes to sort of build on that in terms of how do you think we should address the challenge presented by those legacy systems that are being used? I'll come back to Catherine first of all on that.
Sure. Well, I think if we think about why things maybe currently aren't being used to their full advantage, I think you've all touched on it. We don't know the extent of the capabilities, and everyone's so busy. How do you find out, and how do you have someone that shows you what you can do and think about what you can do? So I think a major problem in the past is that we've got all these tools, but we haven't necessarily looked at the resource. And actually, in private practice at the moment, there are some departments that are, for the first time in a long time, actually underutilized. So it's a perfect time to actually get some of your lawyers to maybe go on a secondment. That's how I started many, many years ago, was during the last recession, I was asked to go on a 3-month secondment internally at Pinson's. And within those 3 months, look at how our team could do better. So there's a unique opportunity at the moment to suddenly have that resource that you haven't had before, to look at, well, what is all your existing tech stack? What is it that you have? Where do you have overlaps? Where is it being used in one team? And maybe then, show and tell that to other teams to go, did you know you could use it for this? Would that work for you? So I think one thing would be the resource point we should look at, and just start with that, back to basics. Do a stack. What is it we have? And if it's Microsoft, there's fantastic stuff out there for free on how to use Power BI, how to use Automate, how to use all those things. YouTube videos. Just get one of your lawyers to go and have a play and think about how they could use some of the things.
I think that's an incredibly important point, Catherine. The number of times that I see people say, well, we don't know how to get the most out of it, but you can find the most fantastic tuitional stuff out there for free, if either on YouTube or just do a Google, and you'd be amazed the stuff that comes through. At my firm, we were struggling to work out, we were recording regular webinars, and we thought, well, let's put these out as podcasts. And at first, we were really struggling. How do you get this from an MP4 to get the MP3 to put that out? And a lot of head scratching until we thought, let's try Google. 5 minutes later, done, through, out,
Exactly.
Next. And we could do it for free, and that just really just showed the power of that, really, in terms of just making sure you use those resources that are available. So, Helen, I'm just going to come to you on that same theme.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting thing, and to me, there's kind of two angles to it around this existing technology piece, and I think in terms of the stuff that Catherine's talked about, really, it starts and ends with people. Anything to do with technology, it's really easy to forget the people aspect of it. But whether it's bringing people in on secondment, putting people out on secondment, getting somebody just to take a bit of non-chargeable time or time away from their desk just to do some Googling or some research and actually start to really develop, well, actually then I can teach it in the next team meeting, I can give some top tips. And I think that's hugely, hugely important and really valuable. I think the kind of other aspect of the challenge of legacy systems is actually in the wider business. It's when you're thinking about when you're innovating and you're thinking about, well, what might I do next? You're thinking about what you're going to interface into. And I think at that point, it's really valuable to start to work with your IT team to think about, well, what is the roadmap for IT? Because then you're looking at existing tech in other areas of the business then, and you're thinking, well, what can I leverage? If procurement got a great big contracts database and an intake setup that I can then leverage to start to bring something through to me. I had no idea they were doing that over there. And then you have that conversation with IT and it opens everything up. And I think that's when you really start to kind of generate value, is by drawing those links and pulling those pieces together, definitely.
That's a really good point. Christy.
Yeah, I mean, I think the main challenge that we have collectively as an industry is that we have a knowledge gap. So we in private practice don't really know what we have or how to get the most out of it, but also our clients don't know what we have or how they can get the most out of it. And oftentimes within law firms, the biggest challenge is, well, my clients aren't asking for it. And then people say, well, clients don't know what they're asking for. And so there's just this, it's almost a vicious circle here. If clients aren't asking for it, it's because they don't know about it. Occasionally when we're offering it to them, we're solutionizing on their behalf and saying, we think we've got this amazing tool that is going to solve all your problems. But, coming back to Helen's point, we haven't really understood what clients' problems are. We haven't taken the time as people to say, what is the thing that is keeping you up at night? And I think that's the fundamental challenge that we have around adoption more generally on both sides.
Yeah. And indeed, I just wanted to say we've had a few questions from the audience, and one of them goes to that question of what do you think law firms are missing out on most when it comes to Office 365? Are there any particular insights that when we're sort of talking about that we'd like to share in answer to that?
I think you can do a lot with workflow, and I think simple automation as well. So, there's some things that, so I, as well as working with a lot of the incumbent tools, also work with a lot of the startups out there. And the startups always show me, the automation startups always show me, for example, how to automate an NDA. There's a lot you can do with open source stuff and free source to automate an NDA. And then you might want to look at things like, every time you're automating something, the bits that you're filling in, the names and the addresses, what a lot of your clients want and what a lot of the partners want is better information. So there's then things you can do to just save it into sort of a kind of a spreadsheet and then do data visualization on it as well. So yeah, and as I said, all of this stuff is kind of on YouTube in 5-minute handy videos of how to do. Now, don't get me wrong, it's someone that's wonderful to follow on LinkedIn for anyone interested in this type of stuff, especially the RPA stuff. So the more the workflow side and the tasks, is Karina Vazarova. She puts out incredible videos on LinkedIn. They're like 5 minutes that talk about all the no-code, low-code tools, and she quite often focuses on ones that aren't legal tech. They're just tech, and your clients may have them, as you say, Helen, already in other departments. You might be using things, and how you go from there. So yeah, I think there's a lot you can do around basic, simple automation, automated checklists, tasks directly to calendars, that kind of stuff.
Brilliant, thank you. I've taken a note of that one. I will certainly take a look at what Rena is saying. Helen.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I think law firms sometimes miss out on is the collaboration tools. So there is so much in there, whether it's on SharePoint or, with the cloud, there comes so much opportunity. And I think there is a real trick being missed on this kind of passing documents back and forth over email, when actually using those collaboration tools can make such a huge difference to the dynamic between the firm and the in-house team. I think that's a huge opportunity that's being missed out on at the moment.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. That was exactly what I was going to say. I mean, I was on a call the other day where we were literally page turning a document, 4 partners on a call. And, if we could just collaborate within that document, which you absolutely can using 365, it would have been such an efficient process. But yeah, we do miss a trick. I agree with that, Helen.
I have had some feedback on the co-authoring part of 365 though, saying that when it gets to a certain point, it gets too complicated. So yeah, but I think where it's going, Microsoft are putting so much investment obviously now into this space. So I agree, co-authoring is an untapped area at the moment that we have tools out there that we can do and we can use. So yeah, it would be a lot of that. I think is we spoke about this when we spoke previously about a month ago on a pre-call about the kind of the culture change. So lawyers actually are very fearful of co-authoring in front of their clients and using tools like that because they don't want their clients to maybe see them write something or do something. I don't know, Christy or Helen, if you have any thoughts on how we help that kind of change management aspect of this. Helen, do you need to just insist that the private practice firms do it? I don't know.
I think there needs to be a bit of a cultural shift, definitely. I think it's always hard to enable that sort of change by kind of forcing it. But at the end of the day, it's clients that we're the ones who hold the power on that. And you know, until we start being open and clear in our communications with the firms that we work with and start being open to the opportunities that come from this sort of collaboration and the kind of, you know, the difference that it can make, and the fact that we're not going to judge them on the 3 lines that get written before they delete everything and then start again. You know, we all have to think about things. We all work it through in different ways. If anybody could see my notebook, they'd probably be absolutely horrified that I'm considered any sort of expert in any field. So I think it's about creating that very human relationship that says, you know, you're not expected to be infallible at every single turn. We want you to bring the value that you bring, and if this tool and this is the opportunity through which to bring it, then absolutely let's be open to it and let's give it a go. I mean, you know, at the end of the day, fail fast. If it doesn't work and you're all just tearing your hair out, well, give it a try on another deal.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's that whole point around trust. That really is what virtual collaboration is all about. That's what enables virtual collaboration. So it's not just between law firms and their clients. You know, the way that we're all working at the moment, we all need to be able to trust one another. And so I think that is something that we're all honing as we speak, for lack of any other choice. But I think that will shift quite significantly as we kind of continue to move forward in this strange virtual world that we find ourselves in.
I think that's a really important point, Christy, absolutely right, because it comes down, I think there's a certain thing, particularly I think for lawyers in private practice, that they think, God, if someone observes my creative process here, that's giving the magic away, you know, and I almost feel, well, you know, how does it, I think it's almost like, that's where it's sort of, oh, no, I have to do that privately. And I think it is a massive change in mindset potentially for the profession there to think about the fact that collaborative working in that way doesn't sort of mean giving away the keys to the castle or something. It means actually it's helping your client and delivering to your client what they're wanting, and that's the kind of shift that we're sort of looking at.
Because actually, I think some of those thought processes actually can then trigger other thoughts. Because if you're seeing stuff and you're reading it, you're like, well, no, that's not the right wording for that, but that just made me think about X, Y, and Z. That's when you really start to get that collaboration happening. That's when you really start working together. And I think that's when it starts to make a real difference.
And indeed, you could circumvent the process that might take sort of 5 emails back and forth to get to if you've then just been able to have that breakthrough in the course of 5 minutes during one call. And then that's helping everyone, isn't it, really?
Absolutely. Yeah.
And I mean, we were just sort of talking there about the what our firm's missing out on. Just one quick anecdote from me is that a friend of mine entered the judiciary a couple of years ago, and as being a judge in his 40s, the court staff were amazed when he was actually using macros in his documents so that he could just, he's had the hearing, comes out, presses the button, the order's generated, goes, here it is, and they were just looking at him as though he'd got 2 heads or something. But it just kind of showed, again, that massive culture shift to sort of say, you don't have to do this the way it has been done before. You don't have to use, like you say, Word as a word processor or as a typewriter. You're actually using the power of it to save that time. So sometimes just something as simple as using those tools can make a massive change on what's been a big admin overhead. But just going on from there, we've had another really good question from our audience as well. And this is from Scott, and he says, would robotics technology help with taking the strain of legacy platforms away? So I just throw that into the mix just to see what you think there, because I know that's sort of almost going a little bit into the realms of the infrastructure, perhaps, as opposed to the software. But I just wanted to see if anyone wanted to sort of
volunteer any thoughts to that one?
I think in terms of like robotics and RPA, I think if we're talking about the same thing, then yes, as I say, like workflow, triage, and everything else. In terms of how it helps legacy systems, I'm not sure I fully understand the question on that, but anything you can do whereby you map through either if you're in-house, what's coming through from the business to you, and how you, exactly can automate using RPA, automate the tasks, the triaging, who it goes to, so that you're continuously improving, you're learning about what's coming from where, and you're freeing up your people. I think that's going to dramatically improve. And for private practice, it's using tools like that to to help and improve the way you deliver those services to your clients. In terms of legacy systems, it may be, I think when you do, we mentioned at the very beginning, and I think it's important to mention on this call for everyone listening, there's a lot out there where law firms are paying. Now, I do work mainly with your kind of like big law firms, but I know of several that are paying maybe £250,000 a year in license fees for a tool that's used by one team once a month. And then they might also have something where they're paying £50,000 a year for a tool that's used by every department every day. And I think doing that kind of analysis, I know this is going off point from the question that was asked, but it was just while I thought of it, I think it's important to say, it's like, that's where you're suddenly going to, so don't be scared of cancelling contracts with your large incumbent software providers, or look at why it's not being used, or do you just need 50 licenses rather than 1,000 licenses? That kind of thing, and freeing up some resource to just do that basic. So it's not the exciting, sexy tech stuff. It's analysis with a spreadsheet and asking some questions. But that could free up a lot of cash to then get some resource in to help you build things like better RPA processes.
I think that's an incredibly important point. Christy.
Yeah, I mean, just to pick up on what Catherine has been talking about, I think to the extent that you're referring to using robotics in order to draw connections between our legacy systems, I think that could be very effective and very efficient, because what, as Catherine has been alluding to, what we have is we've got numerous systems all over the place that don't necessarily talk to one another, and that's where one of our biggest inefficiencies comes from. So yeah, I mean, again, to the extent that you can utilize something like robotics, or frankly something else, I think that the legal platform is ultimately the holy grail. The most frustrating thing for anyone working in our entire industry, not just private practice, is having to go here for one thing, and then having to go over here for another thing, and having to go over there, and then doing this manually over here. All of that is not just frustrating, but terribly inefficient. And I think Helen can probably attest to, from an in-house perspective, having private practice law firms that come to you with their 10 different systems, and then having your other 10 panel firms coming to you with their 10 systems, it's terribly inefficient. So to the extent that robotics could help with that, then I think that would be very welcome.
Thanks, Christy. Helen, do you want to come in on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it is. I think it is internally something that definitely has so much scope for improvement, and I think any organisation that's been around for any amount of time has got legacy systems that just don't do what they need to do with modern systems, but actually changing some of them is really hard, and that is where robotics can make a real difference. But I also think that you're absolutely right, Christy, pulling together, aggregating information. I think I said to somebody the other day, a high-Q aggregator would change my life. So that I don't have to log into HiQ, 9 different times for 9 different law firms to get WIP reports, stuff like that. And I think it's about thinking about, what does the client want? It's not about, what exciting new tool can we bring in? And yes, there's absolutely efficiencies in-house, and if you're doing that for that reason, that's great. But if you're doing it to get a badge, or to get an accolade, or to say you've bought some AI, or you've bought X, Y, and Z, it's about thinking what the client needs, and where the client's going to see the value, and what difference it's going to make to them, because that's the bit that is always quite hard to understand. I was saying to these guys just before we joined that we're just in the process of doing a repanel, and when you're asking those questions about technology, it's great to see these suites of technology that firms are buying and they're investing in, and they're clearly very, very committed to moving in a more technological direction. But what difference is it going to make to me as an in-house person? What am I going to see as a result of it? And that's really the question that I always want answering from my point of view.
There's some very interesting themes coming out here, and indeed that asking the client, we actually talked about that in the last panel as well, in terms of actually ask the client how they want to work, and you might be surprised with the answer that you get. It might not be the preconception that you've convinced yourself is how they want to work, and just because that's the way your firm has worked with them for the previous however many years doesn't necessarily mean that that's their actual preferred method. So that element of communication is important. But the other thing I think that's coming out from the discussion as well is this element of sort of having a real joined up strategy and conversations when it comes to both procurement, when it comes to use of existing systems, to say, well, yeah, are we using this in the right way? Can we use it differently? Can we make these savings? And it's just very much bringing to mind for me some of the stories I've heard where sometimes you've had decision making that hasn't been joined up. So I heard of one large city firm that was on the verge of buying a particular product, and then the compliance at the last minute found out that they were looking at doing this, and they're like, oh, well, yeah, compliance is happy. But then one of the client partners turns around and says, if we go down the route with that product, our client has made it quite clear they will leave. We will lose a large tranche of work if we use that product. But that was literally an 11th hour, almost at the point of signing the contract and doing something that would have lost a huge amount of clients, which again comes back to the importance of asking the clients in the first place, do you actually want to use this? So we've just had another question that came in was, are many people using the security and compliance features in Office 365? Just wondering if any of you had any particular experience with those at all. A few shaking heads there. Helen, have you had any
Not my
experience?
area.
No? Okay.
No, very much not my area. Sorry.
Well, sorry about that, Alan, but we aren't in a position to answer that one for you. But we've had another one from Joanna. What happened to the IT integrators that claim to pull everything together? What are they actually doing if lawyers still have to jump in and out of different systems, multiple systems? I think this is going, Helen, almost to your example there of the high Q aggregator.
No, I think it's, to be honest, I have absolutely no idea what's going on with the integrators, and I think it's a really interesting area because I think that integration is something that is so hard, and it's really, really hard to get right. It's hard to stop flitting between old and new. It's hard to know when to switch off old and actually say, well, we're all on to new now, guys. This is where we're going. And so actually, yeah, I don't know what's going on with that piece. I mean, I know from an in-house perspective that I would always struggle to justify the cost of anything like that. It would always be seen as something that we would be expected to deliver as an internal capability, which I think is one of the ongoing challenges. But I also think it's a real challenge when you're in private practice because there is an element of, well, actually, shouldn't we have the internal capability to deliver this? Well, we bought the package. Why is it not doing what we want it to? And I guess Christy and Catherine, you guys can probably talk a bit more to that point.
Yeah, I mean, I think, as I mentioned previously, that is the holy grail. Having the platform, the all singing, all dancing legal platform is the holy grail. And there are definitely people who are still having a very serious look at this. But I think what's becoming apparent is, A, it's very expensive to try and aggregate all of the different pieces that you need in order to deliver legal services. But also, I think that, you have to look at different industries, you have to look at different jurisdictions. It's not easy. It's not easy at all. And add to that technology is never going to solve every element of a legal matter. You're still always going to need people. And so I think the people that are trying to tackle this are suddenly putting all the pieces together and then saying, okay, but this needs to be a managed service over here. And again, pulling all of those things together is very expensive. But if you look around the industry, you will see some people who are having a pretty good go at it. Yeah. So watch this space.
Anything you'd like to add to that, Catherine?
So I think on the platforms that's definitely kind of been covered. On the HiQ point, I think it's something that actually Thomson Reuters and HiQ should think about themselves, is for the in-house teams that are being expected to log into 10 different sites. Surely there's a way by their username you can see which of the sites they're done, and that shouldn't be a hard feature request. But for I think also the integrators can be people, and I think, you know, rather than, we did speak earlier about freeing up your lawyers, but if you just have a really good Python developer, or someone knows XPath or something like that, there's a lot that can be done with these tools that they're using, say for matter opening. Push that through to first draft document automation, push that through to DocuSign, you know, whatever it is you want. Actually just having one or two developers that work for your law firm, you can do a lot of integration yourselves. And I think the thing is that unfortunately we try and rely on lawyers, or lawyers sort of turn pseudo techies, but not quite like myself, to do that work. And actually, if we have some true developers, which are a lot cheaper than lawyers as well, resource wise. So it's funny how difficult it is to try and persuade the owner of a law firm to hire one data scientist when they'll quite happily go and hire 5 new lawyers. And the value, if that data scientist looked at, let's say, all your financial data of just improving everything by 1%, game changing. But trying to persuade people, trying to persuade lawyers to hire anyone that's anything other than a lawyer is really difficult.
I think that's a very well-made point there, Catherine. Indeed, I think both the sort of buying of someone who isn't a lawyer, or indeed sometimes just getting law firms to think, yes, you do need to make this big ticket investment in a, you know, hiring a certain tool or bringing in a certain platform or using it in a certain way, can sometimes be a very, very difficult task, because they simply don't see, they see it as being almost a sunken cost rather than something that will generate cost. Actually generate profit. They see it as something that's just going to suck in expenditure instead. We've had another good question from our audience, and thank you to our delegates for actually asking so many questions, so many really good questions. Question from Stacey: do firms use Microsoft Storage alongside iManage or NetDocs? And if so, do you find any overlaps or data silos? And do you find those sort of complicated and difficult to manage if using both? So just wanted to sort of put that one out there and see if anyone had come across that experience. Just I can see you nodding, so I was wondering if
Well, I think what we actually have is we have a lot of, so we use iManage, as do many of our peers. And I think what most big law firms have is they have people who are saving their data elsewhere, as in locally, and that tends to be the biggest challenge that we have, is not actually getting the most out of the systems that we've implemented in order to capture that data. So lots and lots of important documents sitting on someone's desktop.
I can see you nodding vigorously there in agreement, Helen.
I think it's one of the eternal challenges, isn't it? It comes back to what I was saying before, is that, you know, there is such a human aspect to any sort of technological change, and humans are very much creatures of habit. And you know, with the greatest respect in the world to lawyers also want to protect that knowledge and the information that they've got within their kind of sphere of influence. And actually that kind of routine of saving to your desktop, it's just like a sort of 21st century version of the massive filing cabinet just next to you. And, you know, I think there is a real challenge of kind of overcoming this idea of things being in the cloud and being off your desktop, but that is really how you start to leverage huge amounts of value. And it is very, very tough to effect that cultural change. And I think it's trying to effect that cultural change across an entire team or function or organization, because there will always be an outlier, and it's bringing that outlier on board to really leverage the full value that you possibly can. Because if you've only got 50% of people who are fully bought into it, absolutely knocking it out of the park, everything's whizzing up into the cloud and everybody's happy, that's still not going to get the full value out of it. And it has a disproportionate impact when people are saving stuff on their desktops, for example.
Anything you'd like to add to that, Catherine?
No, I think that's covered it. It's a really difficult problem to solve. Like, until it's, you know, people will always find the fastest way. And if saving something to iManage takes 5 clicks and saving it to your desktop takes 1 click. It's those kind of things. But yeah, I guess it's just more explanation and demonstrating the benefits. And, you know, if we're talking about something like iManage, you know, especially the stuff that's coming up in terms of what you can do with the knowledge management and the search, it's really quite exciting. So it's maybe just trying to get some advocates to talk a bit more about that, so that people see the benefit of having it all in the one place.
Christy, you want to come back in on that?
Yeah, well, I think that's a really important point, that we are not particularly good all the time at explaining what those benefits are. And we've, you know, alluded to that throughout this discussion. I think when people actually see the benefits and understand the benefits, then they're much more likely to buy in. It's one of the biggest challenges of change management, though. We often just say, this is what you have to do, and expect people to do it, and then get frustrated and don't understand when they don't, when nobody has really clearly articulated what the benefit is to that individual, because you're always going to have outliers, and actually sometimes you're better off just leaving those outliers alone and working with the willing. But you know, if you are able to understand that person's perspective and why they're not actually doing it, and then trying to work with them and understand how you can make this a beneficial thing for them, then you're more likely to win them over. But we often just don't spend the time doing that.
One of the interesting things coming out from this discussion there in particular, I think, Helen, you were saying about sort of leveraging relationships, and I wanted to bring that to then the question of how do you think we can leverage third-party supplier relationships when it comes to the tools that they're supplying?
I think it's probably something that the vast majority of us don't do enough. You know, the supplier knows their tools inside out, and upside down and around about. And at the end of the day, it's always worth phoning them first. And I think we don't do it enough. Just picking up the phone and saying, can you run a tutorial on this? Can you give me a 5-minute guide? Can your tool do this? Because I'm really trying to do it and it doesn't seem to want to. You know, those kind of conversations, I think, you know, that should just be, that's included in the price for the vast majority of solutions. So you're not going to be paying any extra for it. And you're going to get so much more value out of your tools. And I think it's so important just sometimes to pick up the phone, drop them an email and say, can I do this with what you're offering me?
I think that's an incredibly important point, and certainly that's been my experience. I'm still learning when it comes to using it in a most out of technology. And as fast as you learn it, you then find they've done a new evolution and a new update, and there's something else on there.
Where did my button go? That's usually what I'm going. Where did my button go?
Yeah,
I had a button
pretty
that
much.
did this and it vanished.
Yeah, it's the thing that instantly puts you off change when the thing that you were relying on then disappears. But Catherine, Christy, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
Well, I think, again, just remembering that it really ought to be a collaborative relationship, and that's on both sides. So being able to pick up the phone and say, tell me more about what this tool does, because I have this problem. I think what we occasionally get from vendors is vendors just come to us with their beautiful, shiny tools and say, other peers are using this tool, so you should too. And they don't really try and understand what your problems are and what the solution is that they're actually offering. And so sometimes, again, there's that knowledge gap between what the tool can do and what I really need. So I think we just need a lot more collaboration and communication between vendors and purchasers of software.
I completely agree with that. There's so many times where I sit in on demos of tools to potential clients and customers of tools, where when I'm still in the room with the customer when the software providers have left, and they go, yeah, it looks great, Catherine, but how could we use it? And it's kind of like the use cases, there's not enough discussion in the room at the same time. So the software companies really need to think, right, who am I talking to today? Right, I'm going to be talking to a real estate partner and a banking partner. What do they do? And it's okay that you weren't a banking lawyer or real estate partner, but just think about what do they do, and you know, say, well, could you use it? I see that you work a lot in the retail space of real estate, you know, and just suggest that, and then they go, because there's this lack of communication. And also it goes back to that kind of personality stereotype of your typical lawyer going, well, I'm expected to know this, so I'm not going to look stupid by asking. You know, lawyers are very scared of ever saying they don't understand something. So they leave the room and then they go, yeah, it looks good, Catherine, but I don't understand, like, how would we use it? What would we do? And so, yeah, just more people willing to go, I don't understand, let's talk, would be great.
And I think it's a particularly big challenge in-house as well, that is that actually what we get quite often in-house is something that has, you know, gone really, really well in firms. And then they come to us and they're like, oh, look, and it calculates every 6 minutes, and you can track all of your time, you can do this. And you're like, well, you guys have not thought about who we are and the fact that we're an in-house team, and those 6 minutes are meaningless to us in the sense that they are to law firms. So it's absolutely about thinking about that market, and something as simple as saying, well, this is our in-house approach and this is our practice approach would make a huge difference, never mind getting down to kind of, you know, well, who am I actually pitching to, which is obviously also vitally important, but just thinking about what's that lens that I'm going to look at this conversation through, what are the priorities for these people.
I think that communication piece, both sort of internally, externally with the third-party supplier, and then getting a clear handle on, if you use it, this is what you're actually going to be able to use it for, rather than the limited things that you might be imagining, is clearly incredibly important. And I think it's been something we've kept on returning through to during this session. I just wanted to turn now to sort of ask that how should systems be monitored once tools have been adopted and are in use? What's the best way, really, in your experience?
So coming back to kind of what I mentioned early on, when you do that analysis now as to what's our tech stack, I think when you set up any tool to be used by your teams, you need to actually, as part of the process, the business as usual process, so you set it up, you implement it, and then you do need to create a business as usual process that captures usage. There's so much amazingly useful information that you can get out of looking just who's using, how are they using, to then continuously improve it. So what you implement at the very beginning, that's not your answer. That's not going to do all things for all people, and it's just constantly learning as you go. So just simple things like people probably know that, like, I specialize in legal document automation, and just by looking at what your lawyers are answering to each of the questions. So let's say you've got a question that says, do you need a liability clause? Yes, no. If after 4 months it turns out that they're always saying yes, get rid of the question, keep the clause. If they're always saying no, get rid of that clause. If they're always saying other, you need to redraft that clause. So that continuous improvement of your base documents, I think a lot of people get something in, implement it, get it over, and then kind of like hand it over to an ether where then no one looks after it. Someone leaves the firm. There's no processes. One of the worst things I ever saw, I went into a law firm once where they had automated all of their banking documents, and the field names that they'd used for all the questions were 5-digit numbers. Now, why would anyone do that? That person then left. No one had a bit of like a spreadsheet dictionary to explain it. For anyone else to pick up and maintain was just a nightmare. So yeah, making sure that when you implement any new tool or you use any existing tool for a new purpose, that's very carefully documented, and you have at least monthly reviews and appraisals of how it's being used and why. And as I said, there's a lot of people out there that can save a lot of money at the moment by cancelling some licenses that aren't being used.
I think the most important thing is to actually define what success looks like. And that's something that we don't often do. So maybe we'll go away and automate a document that for some reason someone has decided they want to do. Maybe it's just because that particular lawyer had a bit of time. But then if a PSL is the only person going into it, maybe they're going in 500 times, but they're going in to tweak something, or they're just going in to look at it for whatever reason, and the actual end users are not using it. Well, that's not success. So what does success actually look like? If you design a client app and clients aren't actually going into it, that's not success either. And I think that's how we monitor these things, is really determining why have we done this, and what will good look like, and what sort of impact are we expecting to have, and then monitor that.
And being okay with, if it doesn't work first time, going, and why, and is there something we can tweak, or do we kill it? It's okay to kill things too if they weren't a good plan,
Yeah,
Indeed.
absolutely. I think it's so important, you know, that question of what success looks like, what good looks like. But I think it's also so important not to kind of overcommit. And then you kind of end up with a really challenging situation where you're trying to track something. People are very unhappy with it because it hasn't answered the whole world of questions that they were expecting, and then you trying to get down into the nitty-gritty of what actually isn't working is kind of overwhelmed by all of this other kind of feedback and concerns. So I think it's also about managing expectations. If you exceed expectations, you know, what are you going to get? A bit of great feedback, that's fantastic. But if you don't meet people's expectations from the outset, then and they're expecting something huge, then you've got to wade through all of that to find out what the actual problems are with what you're implementing. So it's getting that balance really, really right.
I think that's an incredibly important point. And just, Catherine, you were saying there about the example of the firm that had the 5-digit numbers for all of those documents. You can't help but think, I wonder if that was someone somewhere who was trying to make themselves irreplaceable as the only person, the sole repository of the information of what those 5 digits actually meant. Let's face it, we've all come across that in various different organisations. But then indeed, what's the point of doing that if then you are left with a problem when that person goes? You never want to be in the position where, oh, so-and-so is not in this week, what are we going to do? And then that ends up having an impact on your productivity. The whole point is you need to be able to work at maximum efficiency the whole time. We've had a comment from Alan in the chat just saying, useful, frank discussion from different perspectives and a consistent picture. Need to allocate more time, resource and new skills to get the benefits that are out there for the taking, which I think is quite right, really. It's very much a matter of being able to very often, yes, use what's there, use what's available, and it's not actually involving reinventing the wheel. It's just being a little bit more efficient and a little bit more strategic, perhaps, in terms of how we actually utilize the technology.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the interesting things is that it's when we've talked about allocating resource, we've talked about secondments, and we've talked about people actually taking time out of their roles to do something different with the technology that we've got at our fingertips. And it's not about a side of a desk. I can remember going for a job interview, not for any job that I've actually had, but I can remember going for a job interview and somebody said to me, so why should we have a legal ops person? Can we not just get the lawyers to do it? And, you know, the answer to that is, well, you probably can, but when are they going to find the time? You know, because one deal comes in and a contract arrives, and the next thing you know, the kind of getting the best out of technology has disappeared off the side of the desk. And if people are willing to commit to secondments and willing to commit to kind of mini sabbaticals from their roles, that's absolutely brilliant. But what a legal ops person brings is a different perspective, but capacity. And that is so important in trying to deliver any kind of change program like this. And it doesn't mean to say that you need some sort of legal ops specialist. You need to create that capacity, and it's creating that space for people to really leverage the value out of the technology that they've got in place.
100% agree. The difference between the successful projects and the unsuccessful projects have not been down to the technology that's been purchased or bought. It's been down to the resource. And I think to just take that conversation one step further, I think something that we've also suffered from in the past as to why some existing technologies and legacy tools aren't being used as well as they should. Sometimes when people are choosing who to go on that secondment or who to pull across to work on this project and free up resource-wise, often it would be very difficult, you know, especially for, I don't know, a corporate partner or a banking partner to say, well, they're really creative and they're really commercial and they're really good at solving problems, so we're going to pull them off, because generally that's your best star lawyer and you don't want to give them up. And quite often you pull the quiet one that's got a bit of capacity. If we're talking about change management, leadership, creativity, having the strength to go, you do need to go for those really sparky lawyers that are well liked, that everyone's going to follow when they're selling the benefits, and that's a really difficult conversation to have as well. And of course you're not going to want to take your client's favorite lawyer out of a project, but really the difference that person will make to whether you get good implementation and usage or not is, you know, there's some amazing examples out there. You've got Andy Gray, a real estate lawyer at DLA, what he's managed to do by showing an interest. That you've got April Skip at Deloitte Legal. There's so many examples of these one key lawyers, normally around the 4-year, 5-year PQE mark, that have just, you know, really made things light up and take off that just otherwise wouldn't have happened.
Christy, is there anything you want to add to that at all?
Well, I think, you know, again, it just boils down to the right people with the right skill sets doing the right things. Fundamentally, that's the only way that you can actually get the most out of technology is, you know, as the others have alluded to, right people, right things. It's not about the technology ultimately, it's about the people. I think that's something that we all need to focus more on.
What do you think, Christy, is is it that we can't show well enough the return on investment of taking, because it's very easy to go, if this lawyer bills this many hours and charges this much time, they make the firm this. Is it that we're struggling to articulate the return on investment from putting one of those lawyers on this project? And is there any good examples out there of how to try and show that better?
I mean, I don't think it is necessarily that. I think it tends to be case by case, really. So sometimes, you know, you may have a really good idea, but what we fail to do is we fail to not just show the return on investment, but to show the true value. And so we just attribute a single value to it, when actually it might be about driving relationships, and it might actually be about creating new revenue, in which case we're probably going to put more value on that than we are about one that's reducing our cost to serve, for example. And we fail to think about that thoroughly enough to then really say, okay, this is worth us putting a very expensive, very clever lawyer on, versus, well, we'll actually just have them advise the team. I think that's where we need to get better.
Yeah.
Being more strategic about, you know, these ideas and what they're actually going to deliver, and what we really truly mean by return on investment. It's not always
that could be
an
happier
increase in
lawyers.
revenue. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's something that's forgotten, is if your lawyers are happier and not, you know, spending so much time tearing their hair out because they can't find something on the document management system, they then are going to be less stressed, they're going to get more work done, they're going to be, it's difficult to show those things, though, to try and make the business case. I think that's the hard
exactly.
part.
I think we tend to use a single metric, and that doesn't make any sense. I mean, as law firms, yes, obviously our revenue is the single most important metric, but it isn't the only metric that we measure success by. And so why we try to do that with innovation projects, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
Yeah.
But we're still really, I think the legal industry is really early in its journey when it comes to understanding these projects and driving adoption. So I think we'll get there.
Yeah, definitely. I think we can also take a lot more, we spoke earlier about perhaps getting some developers on board, some data scientists on board, but I think we probably all would recognize the benefits of also having help from really good product developers and product managers and user experience people and everything else, because again, most law firms I go into have someone that previously was a lawyer that has now moved into helping with all of the delivery of everything, and that's fine. That really does help a lot to have people with that understanding of what everyone does, but it would be good if they could. One of the nice things about working with Deloitte compared to the other large law firms that I've worked with was that they did have these people all over the business. So you could say, oh, I want to speak to we were being pitched an AI tool, and it was, you know, they were talking about F1 scores, and it was like, well, do we have someone that actually understands those? Because none of the lawyers in the room understands those. So we were able to get an AI expert in to challenge and ask. I think the per vendors had never been challenged quite so harshly while pitching a legal tech product ever. But yeah, definitely the benefit of other professions helping us with all of this would speed things up too.
Just before we wrap up, I just wanted to give Helen the opportunity. Was there anything you wanted to add to that at all?
No, I don't think massively. I think it's, it is that diversity of thought. It's creating the opportunities for people to challenge and be challenged, because I don't think that any of us have got all of the answers. I mean, I know for sure that the lawyers think in a massively different way to me. I'm a bit, read a contract 1, 2, skip a few, and then get to the end and see what the punchline is. And I don't think I'd fare terribly well in a legal career. I think it's fairly safe to say. But I do bring a different perspective. I bring a different approach, and they challenge me and they make me think harder. And my first couple of years at the Co-op as their head of legal ops, I think I thought harder than I've ever thought in my entire career, and that includes 9 years at KPMG. And it's fantastically challenging, and I think that creating that diversity of thought, whether it is through the data scientist, putting a lawyer in is not always the answer. Sometimes is, but it is not always the answer. And putting a lawyer in is not going to automatically generate an understanding. I think that's the other thing, is that you can almost feel safe putting somebody in who and you have confidence into a position, because you think then they're going to be able to convey a response that you're going to understand about a complex situation or a solution that you don't really get. And that is very, very rarely going to be the answer. It's about finding the right person who is a specialist in that field that will give you the answer that you want. And I think it's that diversity of thought, definitely.
Yes, diversity of thought and avoiding groupthink, which I think is one of the biggest problems affecting businesses as a whole. So, and that typifies it. We've just got a few minutes left. I just wanted to ask each of you individually, just if you've got one particular takeaway that you'd give from our discussion today to our audience, one particular thing that you'd like to give them to think about, to take away from the discussion today. That's putting you on the spot, isn't it?
There it is, isn't it? I think for me, it's probably that you don't know what you don't know. It's about talking to people. It's about thinking about problems that you want solving. It's about Googling and finding that answer. But you don't know what you don't know. Tools can do so much more than we ever think that they can.
Yeah, I think, just to build on what Helen's been alluding to in her last two statements, it's about collaboration. The only way that we're ever going to get the most out of what we have and out of what we don't yet have is through collaboration. The world is far too complex for one person, whether they're a lawyer or otherwise, to know and understand everything. So fundamentally, the more that you can work with other people and get their perspectives and have that diversity of thought, the more successful you'll be.
And finally, Catherine?
I don't think I can top that. That was absolutely fabulous. But just, really, when you're doing technology projects, just make sure that you think about who's actually going to do it. So we need the resource. It's been ignored for too long.
Absolutely. Thank you all very much indeed for contributing to, I think, a very in-depth, honest and frank conversation there with regards to some of the challenges around existing technology and legal ops as a whole. Thank you for your insights. I've got one nice comment from our audience, just saying thank you, useful sessions, just starting a career in data protection, and that they've found these sessions invaluable. That's from Mercy. Thank you very much indeed for that, Mercy. I'm glad to know that you found our morning useful, because we wanted to make sure that we're going to be helpful and would give you plenty of insight. So thank you very much to our three specialists who've taken the time to join us today and also to work with us on the preparation for this conference. And thank you for being so honest in sharing your thoughts and insights. Thank you very much indeed.
Pleasure.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much. Very much.
Bye.
So
Bye.
just leaves me now. That just leaves me now just to conclude the conference, and it's made me think actually in some detail about the fact that very often when people say to me, "Oh, you're a specialist in law and technology," they think that is an incredibly niche area. And I think what we've established just in our three area of discussions this morning is that the intersection between technology and law is actually very, very broad. We've looked at the regulatory compliance piece. We've looked at the difficulties around international data transfers, data protection, Brexit. We've looked at the challenges when it comes to, from a regulatory perspective, just starting to use different technologies to deliver more and more services in a remote manner, so that lawyers can work out of the office and we can deliver our services in different ways to the clients. But that's not all of it.
We've looked at the building business resilience when it's come to being able to respond to change, where it's come to responding at speed to deliver services in ways that we hadn't seen. And then our final discussion there, just on using existing technology, we got some real incredibly useful insight there with regards to some of the problems that can arise, the importance of the clarity around communication, the importance of proper strategic thinking and drawing together sometimes the disparate products and assets and tools that might be in use across an organization but simply aren't being utilized as well as they otherwise might be. So you might not have to reinvent the wheel. You might not have to go and write a huge check for some massive new product. You could just be using existing products in a different and more effective and productive way to actually still effect massive change, both for how you're working within the organization and how your clients are then receiving the service as a result. But sometimes, I don't know what it is, lawyers, we love communicating our specialist knowledge to our clients, but sometimes we just don't talk collaboratively across our departments, our firms and our management structures. And hopefully today, I think, has revealed a few insights on that. I hope you found our session today helpful. I'm looking forward, I don't know about you, to our session tomorrow. We've got 3 new packed panels for you tomorrow. We kick off at 10:05 with session 4 on smaller firms, technology and your business, and we're focusing on the agility piece there in terms of being able to work on the move, in terms of different ways of delivering those services. We've then got a panel on innovation. Andrew in panel 2 talked about the Barclays Eagle Lab, which the Law Society has supported over the last few years, looking at law tech. And we're going to be joined by Barclays Ventures, who are the Law Society's partner in the Eagle Lab, and looking at that, which is the UK's largest law tech incubator. And we'll be looking at ways that we can explore technology innovation, build, buy, acquire, and invest. We'll be looking at law tech in real detail. And then finally, our final session, session 6, we'll actually go back full circle to some of the issues that we talked about right at the start of our conference in panel 1, when we talked about the impact on our staff of using technology. Sometimes the effect of working from home, having to care for vulnerable people in this pandemic, caring for children, caring for loved ones, running a household, and then potentially doing your job and sending emails at 3 and 4 in the morning. So, you know, there are issues there that we really need to look at. And we're going to look at the health and well-being piece from the impact of technology. And we've got some real exciting specialists there who are going to be talking to us about their insights. And I'm really looking forward to sharing those 3 panels with you tomorrow. So I hope you've enjoyed our sessions today. I hope you found them useful. I hope you found them as enjoyable as possible. Thank you for your questions. You really have made this a good interactive panel. If we could, we would all be together in one big room. There'll be 550 of us all together, able to network and discuss the issues that we've discussed in our panels today. We can't do that. This is the next best thing, though, and it's great having an audience of you, not just from the UK, but around Europe and around the world to discuss these issues together. Thank you for your questions. Thank you for your insights and comments. I'm looking forward to welcoming you back to our conference tomorrow. Thank you very much, and look forward to seeing you tomorrow. Enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you. Goodbye.